At 2:47 in the morning, the janitor did something that could get him arrested. He walked into a locked laboratory, sat down at a $30 million machine no employee was allowed to touch, and started typing like he owned it. Upstairs, the CEO watched every keystroke on her security screen, her hand already reaching for the phone to call the police. But what she saw next made her stop cold. This man, the one everybody in the building walked past without a word, wasn't breaking the machine. He was fixing it. And he was fixing it faster than the geniuses who built it. Before you watch what happens next, do me a favor. Drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe good men deserve to be seen, subscribe and stay with me to the end. Because the ending is going to stay with you. At 2:15 in the morning, Michael Carter pushed his cleaning cart down the 41st floor of a building that most people in America would never be allowed to enter. The wheels squeaked. One of them always squeaked. He'd been meaning to oil it for 3 weeks, and every night he told himself he'd get to it, and every night he didn't, because by the time his shift ended, his hands were tired and his back hurt, and all he wanted was to get home before Sophie woke up. He was 58 years old. He had a gray uniform with his first name stitched over the pocket in blue thread. And to every single person in that glass and steel headquarters, a technology company worth more than $11 billion, he was invisible. That was fine with him. Invisible men don't get hurt. "Evening, Mike," said the security guard at the elevator bank, not really looking up. "Morning, Dale," Michael said. "It's morning now," Dale chuckled. "Guess it is. Long night." "They're all long." "Amen to that." That was the extent of it. That was the most conversation Michael Carter had with another adult on most nights of his life. A guard who half remembered his name. A hello. A goodbye. The soft hum of floor buffers and the hiss of the coffee machine he refilled in the executive kitchen so the important people would have their fancy beans when they arrived at 7. He didn't mind. He'd made his peace with it a long time ago. Or he told himself he had, which is a different thing. And Michael knew it was a different thing, because he was a smart man, and smart men can't fully lie to themselves, no matter how hard they try. He wheeled the cart into the 41st floor conference room. The one they called the Lincoln Room, though God only knew why, since there was nothing about it that had anything to do with Lincoln, except that rich people liked to name their rooms after great men, so a little of the greatness might rub off. Somebody had left it a mess. There were coffee cups everywhere. Half-eaten sandwiches curling at the edges. Whiteboards covered in equations and diagrams, arrows pointing everywhere, question marks circled 3 and 4 times. A crumpled shirt over the back of a chair. Somebody had been sleeping here. Michael started stacking the cups, and then because he was a man who had spent his whole life unable to walk past a puzzle without looking at it, he glanced at the whiteboard. He stopped. He set the cups back down. He looked closer. The board was covered in the architecture of a system, a big one, a complex one. Someone had drawn out the whole thing in colored markers, the data flow, the fail-safes, the redundancy loops. And someone else had come along and scrawled in angry black capital letters across the bottom. "Why does it keep crashing?" 4 question marks. Michael counted them. 4 question marks from someone who was scared. He knew the feeling. He looked at the diagram a little longer. His eyes moved across it the way another man's eyes might move across a woman's face, or a mountain, or the sea. He wasn't reading it. He was listening to it. There's a difference, and only a certain kind of person understands the difference. And somewhere in the middle of that listening, a small, cold thought slid into the back of his mind and would not leave. That's my design. Not exactly. It had been changed, rebuilt, expanded, dressed up in newer language. But underneath all of it, underneath the fresh paint, was a structure he would have known anywhere. A structure he had drawn himself at a different desk, in a different life, when his name meant something and his hands still shook with ambition instead of exhaustion. He stood there for a long moment. Then he shook his head, picked the cups back up and told himself the same thing he told himself every single time the past came knocking. Not my problem anymore. He said it out loud quietly to the empty room. The room didn't argue. Rooms, never do. Michael Carter had not always been a janitor. There was a version of him, a younger version, a version that felt now like a man he'd read about in a book, rather than a man he'd actually been, who had walked into buildings like this through the front door, who had stood at the front of rooms and explained things while people leaned forward to listen, who had signed his name on patents, who had been called by more than one magazine one of the finest systems engineers of his generation. He had built the bones of things that made companies rich. And then a man he trusted took all of it away. His name was Vincent Ashford, his business partner. The man Michael had brought in himself because Vincent was charming, and Vincent was connected, and Vincent could talk to investors in a way that Michael, who preferred machines to men, never could. For 6 years they built something together. And Michael fool that he was signed whatever Vincent put in front of him because Vincent handled the business and Michael handled the work, and that was the deal. That was the friendship, that was the trust. Until the money went missing, until the numbers didn't add up, until one terrible morning, Michael sat in a conference room across from a table of lawyers and investors and watched Vincent Ashford calmly, quietly, sorrowfully explain that the fraud, the missing millions, the falsified records, all of it pointed to one man, to Michael. He would never forget the way Vincent wouldn't look at him. Not once in that whole meeting. Vincent looked at the table, at the lawyers, at the window, everywhere except at the man he was destroying. "I didn't do this," Michael had said. His voice hadn't even sounded like his own. "You know I didn't do this. Vincent, look at me. You know." Vincent looked at the table, and that was the moment Michael understood that the truth doesn't matter when the other man holds all the paperwork. He lost the company. He lost the patents signed away, it turned out in documents he'd trusted his partner to prepare honestly. He lost the reputation that had taken 20 years to build, gone in a single news cycle. Engineer under investigation. Fraud allegations rock startup. His face on screens. His name a punchline. No lawyer would take the case without $100,000 up front. And Michael didn't have $100,000 anymore because Michael didn't have anything anymore. And then 4 months later, while he was still reeling, still fighting, still trying to claw his way back to something, his wife died. Rebecca. His Rebecca. An aneurysm, the doctor said. No warning. No goodbye. She went to lie down with a headache on a Tuesday afternoon, and she never got up, and Michael came home to find his 6-year-old daughter sitting on the floor outside the bedroom door, patient as a little saint, waiting for Mommy to wake up. "She's sleeping really long, Daddy," Sophie had said. That was the moment, right there. That was the exact second the old Michael Carter died and the new one was born. Because he looked at his little girl's face and he understood with a clarity that cut straight through all his grief and all his rage that he had one job left in this world. Just one. And it wasn't clearing his name. It wasn't getting revenge. It wasn't rebuilding an empire. It was her. It was making sure that little girl never once, not for a single day, felt like she'd been left alone in the world. So he stopped fighting. He let them win, and he took a job. The first job anybody would give a man with his name and his reputation mopping floors at night, so that his days could belong entirely to his daughter. People who don't understand fathers will never understand that. They'll see a genius pushing a mop, and they'll call it a tragedy. A waste. A fall. Michael didn't see it that way. Michael got to make Sophie's lunch every single morning. Peanut butter and honey cut diagonal, because she said the triangles tasted better. He got to walk her to the corner and wait with her for the school bus and watch her wave at him through the window until the bus turned. He got to be there at 3 o'clock every day, no exceptions, no missed recitals, no "Daddy has a meeting." He slept 4 hours a night. He'd been doing it for 12 years. He would have done it for 100. That was the man standing in the Lincoln Room at 2:15 in the morning, telling an empty room that it wasn't his problem anymore. He almost made it out of the building without getting involved. He really almost did. He'd finished the 41st floor. He'd done the executive kitchen and the 2 bathrooms and the long hallway with the awards nobody read. He was rolling his cart toward the service elevator one squeaky wheel at a time, thinking about whether he had enough bread left at home for tomorrow's lunch when he heard the voices. They were coming from the emergency engineering lab, the big one. The glass-walled room at the end of the hall that most nights was dark, but tonight blazed with light, and tonight was full of people, even at this hour, even on a night when every reasonable person in the city was asleep. Michael slowed down. He shouldn't have. He knew he shouldn't have, but a man is what he is, and Michael Carter was a man who could not walk past a puzzle, especially not a puzzle that was breaking people. He stopped his cart just outside the glass and pretended to wipe down a doorframe that didn't need wiping. Inside, maybe a dozen engineers stood or sat or paced. Young, most of them. Brilliant, no doubt. You didn't get into a building like this if you weren't. But right now, they didn't look brilliant. They looked wrecked. They looked like people who had been awake too long and had run out of ideas, and were now just staring at a screen, hoping it would forgive them. At the center of it all stood a young man in a wrinkled shirt, the shirt Michael realized that had been draped over the chair in the Lincoln Room, the one who'd written the 4 question marks. He had that particular kind of desperation on his face that Michael recognized instantly because he'd worn it himself once a long time ago. "Run it again," the young man said. "Daniel, we've run it 40 times. Then run it 41. Because I am not walking into that room at 7 a.m. and telling Claire Anderson that we still don't have it." Claire Anderson. Michael knew the name. Everybody in the building knew the name. The CEO. The woman whose office he cleaned every night and never once saw because she was gone by the time he arrived and back before he left. Somebody typed. Somebody hit a key, and the whole room held its breath. Michael watched the reflection in the glass, a big display numbers scrolling a status bar climbing. It got to 71%. And then it stopped. A red banner. Somebody swore. Somebody put their face in their hands. "Same failure point," a woman said, exhausted. "Same one. Every time. 71%, and it just falls over." "It's the hardware," said a man by the window. "It has to be the hardware. The load's spiking and the—" "It's not the hardware," Daniel snapped. "We swapped the whole rack, twice. It is not the hardware." "Then it's the new compiler." "It's not the compiler either." "Raj, we rolled it back and it's still." "Then what is it?" someone shouted. And the room went quiet, because that was the question. Wasn't it? That was the whole question. And nobody in that brilliant, expensive, exhausted room had a single answer left to give. Out in the hallway, holding a rag against a doorframe that did not need cleaning, Michael Carter closed his eyes. Because he knew. He knew exactly what it was. He'd known from the whiteboard. He'd suspected it the second he saw the architecture, and now watching that status bar die at 71% for the second time in 10 minutes, he was certain. It wasn't the hardware. It wasn't the compiler. It wasn't anything they were looking at, because they were all looking at the wrong end of the machine. They were staring at the front door while the fire burned in the basement. The problem was buried deep in the core, in the original architecture, in a handoff between 2 subsystems that had been fine, perfectly fine in the original design, but that would have to break the moment. Someone increased the data load past a certain threshold without adjusting a single timing parameter that almost nobody alive would think to check. He knew that parameter would break. He knew because he was the one who had written the note about it 12 years ago in documentation that had probably been deleted or lost or ignored, warning whoever came after him. If you scale this past a certain point, you have to retune this or it will fall over. They had scaled it, and they had not retuned it, and now it was falling over. And they had no idea, because the man who wrote the warning had been erased from the company's history like he'd never existed at all. Michael opened his eyes. Not my problem, he told himself. He picked up his cart. He turned to go. And then, Daniel, the young man in the wrinkled shirt, said something that stopped Michael dead in the hallway. "If we don't fix this by morning," Daniel said, his voice cracking, "she's going to have to tell the government the partnership's off. And when that happens, they're going to need someone to blame. And it's going to be us, all of us. Every one of you in this room, so please, please, somebody in here has to be smart enough to see what I can't." Michael stood very still. They're going to need someone to blame. He knew that story. God, he knew that story. He'd lived that story. He'd had his whole life torn out from under him because a company needed someone to blame, and he was the one standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. He looked through this glass at those young faces, at Daniel, who couldn't have been more than 30, at the woman rubbing her eyes, at the kid by the window who'd said it was the hardware who was probably somebody's son, probably somebody's whole world, the way Sophie was, Michael's whole world, a group of good people, about to become the villains in somebody else's failure. And Michael Carter, standing in a gray uniform with his name in blue thread, understood that he had a choice to make. The kind of choice a man only gets a few times in his life. He could walk away, keep his head down, keep being invisible, keep his quiet, safe, small life intact, and let those kids in there face the fire alone the way he'd faced it alone. Or he could do something that would risk everything. Because here was the truth. Michael had never told anyone, if he walked into that room, if he touched that machine, if he showed even one person in this building what he could actually do, then somebody sooner or later would start asking questions. Who is this man? Where did he come from? How does a night janitor know how to do that? And if the wrong person found the answer, if it got back to the people who had buried him, the investors, the men whose money still ran through this very building, then the quiet life he'd built for Sophie, the little apartment, the peanut butter triangles, the safe invisible corner of the world where nobody could hurt them, all of it could come apart. He'd hidden for 12 years for a reason. The reason was asleep in a bunk bed 3 miles away with a nightlight shaped like a star, expecting her daddy to be there in the morning, like he always was. Michael gripped the handle of the cart until his knuckles went white. "Not my problem," he whispered one more time. But this time, even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He'd known it was a lie from the moment he saw the 4 question marks on the whiteboard. Because a man who cannot walk past a puzzle is one thing. A man who cannot walk past people about to be destroyed, that's something else. That's the deepest part of who a person is. And Michael Carter, whatever else the world had taken from him, still had that part. Rebecca used to tease him about it. "You'd fix a stranger's flat tire in the rain and be late to your own funeral," she'd say. And he'd say, "Somebody's got to," and she'd shake her head and smile and love him a little more. He thought about Rebecca now. He thought about what she'd say if she could see him standing in this hallway, hiding, mopping floors, so scared of the past that he'd let a room full of kids go down without lifting a finger when he was the one man in the building who could save them. He knew exactly what she'd say. She'd say, "Michael Carter, you get in that room." Inside the lab, the mood had gone from panic to something worse. Something quiet. The quiet of people who have started in the private rooms of their own hearts to accept that they've lost. "Send everybody home," Daniel said finally, his voice flat. "There's no point. I'll draft the memo. I'll tell Claire myself. It's on me. I ran this team, it's on me." "Daniel. Go home, Priya. Go see your kids. There's nothing else we can do tonight." One by one they started to gather their things, laptops closing, chairs sliding back, the terrible defeated sounds of a battle ending on the wrong side. That was when the door opened, and a man in a gray janitor's uniform stepped into the room. For a second, nobody even reacted. He was, after all, the janitor. Janitors came and went. He was part of the furniture part of the walls, the kind of person your eye slides right past. "Sorry," Priya said, automatically gathering her bag. "We're just clearing out, you can come in and—" "What's the failure point?" Michael said. The room went still. Priya blinked. "I'm sorry. The system." Michael nodded toward the big display where the red banner still glowed. "It's dying at 71%, every time. Same spot, right?" Daniel turned around slowly. He looked at the janitor the way you'd look at a dog that had just spoken a full sentence in English. "How do you—" He stopped, started again. How do you know that? Michael didn't answer. He was looking at the screen now, really looking. His eyes moving across the scrolling logs faster than any of them could follow. You keep swapping the hardware, Michael said. And it keeps failing in the same place. You rolled back the compiler and it still failed in the same place, so it's not the hardware and it's not the compiler. He tilted his head. Which means you already know where it isn't. You just don't know where it is. Okay, Daniel said carefully, the way you'd talk to someone who might be dangerous. Who are you? I'm the guy who cleans this floor, Michael said. Can I look at your core timing configuration? Absolutely not, said the man by the window, Raj. This is a secured system, you can't just… Raj. Daniel held up a hand. His eyes hadn't left Michael's face. Something in him, some engineer's instinct, some drowning man's instinct, had heard something in the janitor's voice that the rest of them hadn't. How do you know it's the timing? Michael was quiet for a moment. Here it was, the edge of the cliff. One more step, and there was no going back. The moment he said the next thing, he could not unsay it. The invisible man would become visible, and visible, men can be found, and found, men can be hurt. He thought about Sophie's star-shaped nightlight. He thought about Rebecca. Michael Carter, you get in that room. Because, Michael said quietly, the two subsystems that hand off right before 71% were never designed to run at the load you're running them at. And when you scaled the data throughput past, I'd guess around 2/3 of maximum, the timing window between them got too tight. So one of them is finishing its handoff a few milliseconds before the other one's ready to receive it. And the second one thinks the first one crashed. So it triggers a safety shutdown, which looks from where you're all standing exactly like a hardware failure at 71%. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Priya set her bag back down on the table without seeming to realize she was doing it. Raj's mouth had come open. And Daniel had gone pale because Daniel was the smartest one in the room, and Daniel had just understood two things at the same time. The first was that the janitor might be right. The second was that if the janitor was right, then the janitor was not a janitor at all, and the world had just tilted several degrees off its axis. Daniel's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. That's not possible. How could you possibly know the internal architecture? That's proprietary. That documentation doesn't even exist anymore. We couldn't find the original. I know, Michael said. You know what? I know the documentation doesn't exist anymore. He met the young man's eyes. I know because I know who deleted it. And I know exactly what it said. Because I'm the one who wrote it. 40 floors up in an apartment she kept precisely because she could never sleep. Claire Anderson was awake. She was always awake at times like this. She'd built a 9-figure company on the back of not being able to sleep on lying in the dark, running numbers, seeing failures before they happened. Tonight, she was seeing a failure she could not stop. In 6 hours, she had a call with people who could make or break the biggest partnership in her company's history, and her best team had spent 5 days failing to fix the one thing standing in the way, and she had absolutely nothing to tell them, but were still working on it, which is the sentence that ends careers. She had the building's security feed open on the tablet beside her bed. She always did at night. Some people counted sheep. Claire watched her building breathe. It calmed her, the empty hallways, the cleaning crews, the steady rhythm of a place that never fully slept. She'd been half watching the engineering lab the way you watch a hospital room when she saw the janitor walk in. She frowned. That was odd. The cleaning crew didn't go into the secured labs while people were working. She watched him stand there. Watched the engineers turn toward him. Watched. And this was the part that made her sit up. Made her set down the glass of water she'd been holding. Watched her lead engineer Daniel Reyes, the young man she'd personally hand-picked and privately considered the most talented person on her staff, take a slow step backward from the janitor. Away from him. The way you step back from something you can't understand. Claire turned up the volume. There wasn't any. The lab feed was video only. So she watched in silence as the man in the gray uniform said something. And the whole room went still. And then he said something else and pointed at the screen, and her engineers, her brilliant, exhausted, defeated engineers, looked at each other with an expression she had not seen on their faces in 5 days. Hope. She watched the janitor walk toward the main terminal. The one no unauthorized person was ever under any circumstances permitted to touch. She watched Daniel Reyes step aside and let him. "What in the world?" Claire Anderson whispered, "is happening in my building?" Her hand moved toward the phone. Security was one button away. One press, and there'd be men in that room in 90 seconds, and the strange janitor would be removed and order would be restored. Her thumb hovered over it, and then the man sat down at the terminal and cracked his knuckles, the way a pianist does before a concert, the way a man does when he has done a thing 10,000 times and began to type. And Claire Anderson did not press the button. She would ask herself later why she didn't. Why, against every protocol she'd ever written, against every instinct that had kept her company safe? She let a stranger in a janitor's uniform put his hands on the most valuable system her company had ever built. The honest answer, the one she'd only admit to herself, and only much later, was this. He didn't move like a stranger. He moved like a man coming home. Down in the lab, Michael Carter's hands found the keyboard, and for the first time in 12 years, they stopped shaking. It was the strangest thing. His whole life now was a careful, quiet, trembling thing, a life lived on the edge of just barely making it a 4 hours sleep, and rent that was always a little too high, and the constant low hum of fear that something someday would take Sophie away from him too. But the moment his fingers touched those keys, all of that went quiet. Because this, he knew. This was the one country where he had never been a foreigner. He could lose his name, his money, his reputation, his wife, his whole entire life. And he could still sit down at a machine like this and speak to it in a language it understood, and it would answer him, and it would never, ever lie. "What are you doing?" Daniel breathed, leaning over his shoulder. "What's talk me through it? What are you—" "I'm not changing anything permanent," Michael said. His eyes locked on the screen, his fingers flying. "You don't want me rewriting your core at 3 in the morning, and I don't want to. I'm just going to widen the timing window. Give the 2 subsystems room to breathe. It's a patch, a bandage. It'll hold long enough for your call, long enough for you to build the real fix in daylight when you've all slept. How do you know it'll— Watch." Michael's hands stopped. He looked at what he'd written. Read it once top to bottom, the way a man reads a letter he's about to send that he can never take back. Behind him, the whole room had gone silent again. Priya had come around to see the screen. Raj, who'd tried to throw him out 5 minutes ago, was staring like a man at a magic show. Every one of them knew in the way that experts know things that they were watching something they would talk about for the rest of their lives, even if they didn't yet understand what it was. "When I run this," Michael said quietly, mostly to himself, "it's either going to work or it isn't. And if it works, none of you can unknow what you saw tonight." He paused. "I want you all to be sure. Because once this goes through, some of you are going to start asking who I am, and you're not going to like all the answers." "Just run it," Daniel whispered. "Please, whoever you are, run it." Michael Carter took a breath. He thought about Sophie's face, about the peanut butter triangles, about the corner where they waited for the bus, about the life he was right now in this exact second putting at risk for a room full of strangers who wouldn't have learned his name if he'd cleaned their floors for 100 years. And then he thought about the 4 question marks, about they're going to need someone to blame, about a table full of lawyers who wouldn't look at him, about every good man in the history of the world who'd ever been thrown away by people who never bothered to see him. Some things a man does not walk past. He pressed enter. The status bar appeared on the big display. Every head in the room turned toward it. 40 floors up, Claire Anderson leaned so close to her tablet that her breath fogged the glass. Claude's response was interrupted. "Show more." The status bar climbed. 10%. 20. Nobody in the room breathed. Daniel had one hand pressed flat against the desk like he was trying to hold the floor down. Priya had her fingers over her mouth. Raj, who 3 minutes ago had been ready to call security on this man, was leaning so far forward he looked like he might fall into the screen. 30%. 40. "Come on," Daniel whispered. "Come on, come on." 50. 60. And then it hit 68, and the whole room seemed to stop, because 68 was where the fear lived. Now 68 was the edge of the cliff they'd fallen off 40 times in a row, and everyone in that lab was bracing for the red banner, for the swearing, for the sound of hope dying one more time. 69. 70. 71. Nobody moved. 72. Priya made a sound that wasn't quite a word. 75. 80. The bar wasn't slowing down. It wasn't hesitating. It was climbing like it had never had a problem in its life, like the wall that had stopped a dozen of the smartest people in the country for 5 straight days had simply never existed. 88. 92. 97. "Oh my God," Raj said. 100%. A green banner filled the screen. System stable, all processes nominal. For 1 full second, the room was completely silent, and then it exploded. Priya screamed. Actually screamed the way you scream at a wedding or a birth, and grabbed Raj by both shoulders and shook him. Somebody started laughing, that helpless kind of laughing that's really just the body letting go of 5 days of terror. Daniel Reyes turned around in a slow circle, with both hands on top of his head, staring at the ceiling, staring at nothing, his eyes shining. And in the middle of all of it, the janitor sat quietly at the terminal, hands folded in his lap, watching the green banner like a man watching a sunrise he wasn't sure he'd live to see. "It's holding," he said softly. Nobody heard him over the noise. He didn't say it for them. "It's holding." Daniel came back around to face him. The young engineer's face was wet. He didn't bother to hide it. He stopped, swallowed. "You just did in 20 minutes what my entire team couldn't do in 5 days. "Your team could have done it," Michael said. "You were all looking in the right building. You were just on the wrong floor." "Don't." Daniel shook his head hard. "Don't do that. Don't be humble right now. Who are you? What's your name, your real name? Your real." Michael stood up from the terminal. He picked his rag up off the desk, folded it once, and tucked it back into his cart, and the ordinariness of that motion, the sheer everyday smallness of it, made the whole room go quiet again. Because it reminded them of what they'd forgotten for 20 minutes. That this man cleaned their floors. "My name's Michael," he said. "I clean this floor Tuesday through Saturday. You've all walked past me about 400 times. Nobody said anything. "The patch will hold for at least 72 hours. Michael went on matter-of-fact, already turning his cart toward the door. "Probably longer, but don't trust it past that. Build the real fix. Retune the handoff timing on both subsystems properly in the core, not a bandage like I did. And write it down this time. Write down why. So the next person who scales this thing up doesn't have to spend 5 days finding out the hard way." He paused at the door. "That's the part everybody always skips. Writing down the why. Somebody skips it, and then 12 years later, a good kid stays up 5 nights in a row for no reason." He said it lightly. But there was something underneath it, some old wound, and Daniel heard it even if he couldn't place it. "Wait," Daniel said. "Michael, wait. You can't just... You have to let us tell Claire. You have to let us tell somebody. Do you understand what you just did? Do you understand what this is worth?" Michael stopped in the doorway. For just a second, something crossed his face, something tired and old and careful. "Do me a favor," he said. "Tell her the system's stable. Tell her the team figured it out." He looked back at them, at all their young, hopeful faces. "You did figure it out. You figured out to listen when somebody told you where to look. That counts. That's most of the job, actually knowing when to listen." He nodded once. "Leave my name out of it, please. It's better for everybody. Trust me on that." And before Daniel could argue, before anyone could stop him, the janitor pushed his squeaking cart out into the hallway and was gone. The lab stood in stunned silence. Then Priya said very quietly, "Daniel, there is no way. There is no way a janitor knew our core architecture." "I know," Daniel said. "He said he wrote the documentation." "I know. Nobody wrote that documentation. We looked, we tore the archives apart. There's nothing. It's like the original design just appeared out of nowhere, fully formed 12 years ago, and then whoever built it just—" She stopped. She and Daniel looked at each other, and the same terrible, impossible thought moved across both their faces at exactly the same time. 12 years ago, Daniel said slowly. Neither of them finished it. Because upstairs on the 42nd floor, in an apartment where the lights were now all on Claire Anderson, was already 3 steps ahead of them, and she was reaching for her phone, and her hands were not quite steady. She had watched the whole thing. The green banner, the celebration, the janitor standing up folding his rag, saying something that made the whole room go still. She hadn't been able to hear a word of it. But she didn't need to hear it. She'd seen enough. She'd seen a man in a gray uniform sit down at a $30 million system and fix in 20 minutes the problem that had nearly cost her everything. She dialed. It rang twice. "Marcus," she said when the head of security picked up his voice thick with sleep. "I need you to pull every piece of footage from the engineering lab tonight, and I need the badge records for the entire cleaning crew, and I need it in my office before 6 a.m. "Ms. Anderson, it's 3 in the p. I know what time it is, Marcus. Before 6. And one more thing." She was already pulling a blazer on over her night clothes, already moving toward the door, because Claire Anderson had never in her life been able to sit still with a question this size. "There's a man on the night cleaning crew. First name Michael. I want everything. Where he came from, how long he's worked here, who hired him. Everything." She hung up before he could answer. Then she stood alone in her apartment for a moment in the blue light of the tablet, staring at the frozen image of a janitor she'd walked past 100 times and never once seen. "Who are you?" she said to the screen. The screen didn't answer. But she was going to find out. Claire Anderson always found out. Michael, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was happening. He finished his shift. He did the 43rd floor and the 2 labs on 44, and he emptied the last of the recycling, and he clocked out at 4:40 in the morning, like he did every morning, and he rode the bus home through the dark and quiet city with his forehead against the cold window and his eyes half closed. He was thinking about what he'd done, turning it over. Part of him, the tired part, the scared part, the part that had spent 12 years keeping his head down, was furious with himself. "You had one job," that part said. "Stay invisible, keep her safe," and you threw it all away for a room full of strangers. But another part of him, a quieter part, felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt like himself, just for 20 minutes, sitting at that terminal. He'd been the man Rebecca married. The man Sophie would never get to meet, not really because he'd died the day Rebecca did. And it had felt so good, so much like coming up for air after years underwater, that it scared him more than the risk did. He didn't want to want it. That was the trouble. He'd built a whole life around not wanting it. He got home a little after 5. He let himself into the small apartment as quietly as he could, and he checked on Sophie the way he did every single morning, easing her door open 2 inches to see her sleeping shape in the glow of the star-shaped nightlight. 18 years old now, technically too old for a nightlight, but she kept it, and he never asked why, and he understood, because it had been Rebecca's idea back when Sophie was small and afraid of the dark. And some things you don't outgrow because you don't want to. She was sleeping. She was fine. The world was still where he'd left it. Michael made himself a cup of coffee he didn't really want, and sat at the kitchen table as the sky went gray outside the window. And he told himself the whole thing was over. He'd fixed the machine. He'd told the kids to leave his name out of it. And by tomorrow, it would all be forgotten. Companies didn't chase down janitors. He'd disappear back into the walls where he belonged, and everything would go back to normal. He almost believed it. Then, at 6:15, his phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from the cleaning company. From his supervisor, a decent man named Ortiz, who'd never texted him this early in 3 years. Mike, you need to come in today. 10 a.m. Main building. HR wants to talk to you. You're not in trouble. But come alone, and don't be late. Michael read it 3 times. You're not in trouble. In his experience, that sentence had never once in the entire history of the world meant that someone was not in trouble. He set the phone down very carefully, like it might go off. Across town, Sophie's alarm went off, and he heard her stir, heard the soft thump of her feet on the floor, and he did what he always did. He got up. He put bread in the toaster. He got the peanut butter and the honey out of the cupboard. And when she shuffled into the kitchen with her hair a mess and her eyes half shut, he had her breakfast ready the way he had every morning for 12 years. "Morning, Daddy," she mumbled. "Morning, sweetheart." She stopped, looked at him. Even half asleep, she knew his face better than anyone alive, and something in it was different this morning. "You okay?" she asked. "You look weird." "I'm fine." He smiled at her. It was mostly real. "Long shift. Eat your toast, you'll miss your bus." She ate her toast. She grabbed her bag. She kissed him on the cheek the way she'd done every morning since she was 6, and she was out the door and gone off to community college, where she was studying to be a nurse. And Michael stood at the window and watched her go the way he always did, and then he got dressed in his one good shirt. Because you don't wear a janitor's uniform to a meeting where they say you're not in trouble. At 10 o'clock exactly, Michael Carter walked into the main building through the front door for the first time in 12 years. It felt wrong. Every part of it felt wrong. The lobby was too bright, too tall, full of people in expensive clothes who moved with the easy confidence of people who belonged. He'd only ever entered this building through the loading dock at night in gray. Coming through the front in daylight in a collared shirt, he felt like an imposter. He felt like at any second someone would point at him and shout that he didn't belong here. And the terrible thing was that a part of him would have agreed. He gave his name at the desk. The woman looked at her screen, and then she looked at him, and something changed in her face, a flicker of surprise quickly hidden. "Yes, Mr. Carter," she said. "They're expecting you. 42nd floor. Someone will meet you at the elevator." The 42nd floor. The executive floor. Michael had cleaned that floor 5 nights a week for 3 years and never once seen a living soul on it. He rode up alone. The elevator was glass on one side, and the city fell away beneath him, and he watched it shrink, and thought about how strange it was that a man could spend 3 years inside a building and never see it in the daylight, never see it from above, never see it as anything but a place to be endured until his shift ended and he could go home to the only thing that mattered. The doors opened. Daniel Reyes was standing there. The young engineer looked like he hadn't slept because he hadn't, but he was showered and changed, and his eyes were bright and nervous and fixed on Michael's face like Michael was a ghost that might vanish if he blinked. "You came," Daniel said. "I was told to." Michael stepped off the elevator. "What is this, Daniel? What's going on? I asked you to leave my name out of it." "I did." Daniel's voice cracked a little. "I swear to God, Michael, I didn't say a word. I kept my promise. It wasn't me." "Then how?" "She saw you." Daniel lowered his voice, glancing down the hall. "On the cameras. She was watching the whole time. She saw everything." Michael's stomach dropped straight through the floor. She saw everything. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to turn around, get back in that elevator, ride down to the lobby, walk out the front door, and never come back. Quit the job. Find another building to clean another city if he had to. Disappear again the way he'd disappeared before. Protect Sophie. Protect the quiet. Run. He'd almost turned. He'd actually shifted his weight toward the elevator. And then a door opened at the end of the hall, and a woman stepped out. And Michael Carter found himself for the first time in 12 years face to face with the person who ran the company that his own stolen work had helped to build. Claire Anderson was smaller than she looked in photographs. That was his first thought, and it was a strange thing to notice, but it was what he noticed. She was maybe 50, sharp-featured, dressed in a gray so severe it was almost the color of his old uniform, and she had the kind of eyes that missed nothing, that were at this exact moment missing nothing about him. She looked at him for a long moment. He made himself look back. "Mr. Carter," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "Thank you for coming. Will you sit with me?" She gestured to the open door, to her office. Michael didn't move. "Ma'am," he said, "with respect, whatever you think you saw last night, I'd like to keep my job, and I'd like to go home, and I'd rather not make a thing of it. The machine's fixed. Your people are good. That's all that matters." "That's not all that matters." She said it gently, but there was steel under it. "Mr. Carter, I run a company of 4,000 people, and last night I watched a member of my custodial staff sit down at a proprietary system that 6 of my best paid engineers couldn't crack and solve it in the time it takes to watch a sitcom." She tilted her head. "You'll forgive me if I can't just let you go home and pretend that didn't happen." Michael said nothing. "I'm not here to fire you," Claire said. "I'm not here to accuse you of anything. You have my word on that. I just want to talk, that's all. One conversation. And if at the end of it you want to walk out that door and go back to your life, you can, and I'll make sure nobody bothers you about it again." She paused. "But I don't think you will, because I looked into you last night, Mr. Carter, and I have some questions, and I have a feeling that somewhere underneath those questions is a story that somebody worked very, very hard to bury." The hallway was very quiet. Michael felt something cold move through him. Not fear exactly, something older than fear. The feeling of a door he'd nailed shut a long time ago starting slowly to creak open. "You looked into me," he said. "I did." "Then you know I'm a fraud." He said it flatly, without emotion, the way you'd read a fact off a page. "You know I bankrupted a company. You know I stole millions. It was in every paper 12 years ago. Just type my name. It's all right there." "I did type your name," Claire said. "And yes, that's what it says." She took a step closer, and her eyes, those sharp, missing-nothing eyes, held his. "But here's the thing, Mr. Carter. I've been running companies for 25 years. I've met a lot of fraudsters, men who steal millions. I know what they look like. I know how they talk. I know how they move." She glanced just briefly down the hall, toward the engineering wing, toward the lab. "And I have never once in my entire life seen a man who stole millions of dollars and then walked away from all of it to push a mop for $31,000 a year so he could be home in time to make his daughter's lunch." Michael went very still. "That's not what a thief does," Claire said quietly. "So either you're the strangest criminal I've ever encountered, or something about that story is wrong, and I would very much like to know which." For a long moment, Michael Carter didn't say anything at all. 12 years. 12 years of silence. 12 years of keeping his head down, of swallowing it, of telling himself none of it mattered anymore, that the truth was a luxury he couldn't afford. That clearing his name would cost money he didn't have, and time Sophie needed more, that the past was dead and buried, and best left that way. 12 years of nobody, not one single person ever once looking him in the eye and saying, "I don't think you did it." And now here was this stranger, this CEO, this woman who ran the company built partly on his stolen work, saying the words he'd stopped letting himself even hope to hear. He felt his throat get tight. He hated it. He hadn't cried in front of another human being since Rebecca's funeral, and he was not going to start now, not here, not in front of this woman in her gray suit. He looked down. He gathered himself. When he looked back up, his voice was steady. "You've got a partnership call this afternoon," he said. "The government one. That patch I put in is going to hold, but your people need to build the real fix before it wears off. That's what matters today. Not me. Not some 12-year-old news story. Go save your deal, Ms. Anderson." He turned to go. "Michael." He stopped. She'd used his first name. He wasn't sure why that stopped him, but it did. "Who's Vincent Ashford?" Claire said. Michael turned around very slowly. The name hung in the air between them like a live wire. He hadn't said that name out loud in 12 years. He'd trained himself not to even think it, because thinking it did something to him, lit some old furnace of rage that he couldn't afford to feed, that would burn his careful, quiet life to the ground if he ever let it out. He'd buried Vincent Ashford right alongside the man he used to be. And now this woman was standing in a hallway, saying it like it was nothing. "Where did you hear that name?" Michael said. His voice had changed, gone low and flat and dangerous. Claire didn't flinch. She'd noticed the change, though. He could see her notice, it could see her filing it away. "I told you I looked into you last night," she said. "It took my head of security about 2 hours. Your old company, the bankruptcy, the fraud case. Your name was all over it. Michael Carter, chief engineer, disgraced, disappeared." She paused. "But there was another name in those files, too. The man who was your partner. The man who took over what was left of the company after you went down. The man who, according to public record, is now a very wealthy and very respected investor." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Vincent Ashford. Who happens, Mr. Carter, and this is the part that kept me up the rest of the night, to sit on the board of one of the largest firms invested in this company. My company. The one you fixed last night." Michael felt the floor tilt. He'd known in a distant, abstract way that his old work had ended up here. He'd seen it in the architecture. But he had truly not known that Vincent himself was connected to this building. That the man who'd destroyed him was still up there somewhere in the world of boardrooms and investors, still rich, still respected, still winning, while Michael pushed a mop through the halls of a company Vincent helped fund. The two of them in the same building, all this time. "So you understand," Claire said, watching his face very carefully now. "Why I have questions. Because last night, a janitor fixed a system built on architecture nobody in my company can account for. And that same janitor turns out to be a disgraced engineer who vanished 12 years ago. And the man who ruined him is sitting on my cap table." She let that settle. "That's a lot of coincidences, Mr. Carter. I don't believe in that many coincidences. Do you?" Michael was quiet for a long, long moment. And then something shifted in him. Some old dam holding back 12 years of water developed a crack. "No," he said. "I don't." "Then come inside," Claire said gently. "And tell me what really happened. Not the version in the papers, the real one. And I promise you, Michael, I will listen to every word." Michael looked at her. He thought about Sophie, about the risk, about the quiet life, the star-shaped nightlight, the peanut butter triangles, all of it hanging by a thread that this woman was right now holding a pair of scissors to. But he also thought about Vincent Ashford, sitting in a boardroom somewhere in this very building, respected, wealthy, free. And he thought about a table full of lawyers 12 years ago and a man who wouldn't look at him. "If I tell you," Michael said slowly, "and it turns out you're on his side, if this is some kind of test or a trap or a way to make sure I stay quiet, then I lose everything. Again. And this time I've got a daughter who'd lose it too." He held her gaze. "So before I walk through that door, I need to know one thing. Just one. Why do you care? You've got $1 billion deal to save today. Why does a 12-year-old story about a janitor matter to you at all?" Claire Anderson was quiet for a moment, and then she said something Michael did not expect. "Because 30 years ago," she said, "I was a secretary, and I built the thing that made my boss famous. And when it made him rich, he took my name off it, and he told everyone it was his idea. And there was nothing I could do about it, because I was a 23-year-old girl with no money and no lawyer, and no one who'd believe me over him." Her jaw tightened. "So I know exactly what it looks like when someone with power takes something from someone without it. I've spent 25 years building a company where that isn't supposed to be able to happen." She looked at him steadily. "And last night I found out it might have happened right under my nose to a man cleaning my floors funded by a man on my board. So yes, Mr. Carter, I care. I care very much." Michael studied her face. He'd spent 12 years learning to read people fast, to spot the lie, the angle, the con, because the one time he'd trusted the wrong man, it had cost him everything. He looked at Claire Anderson now with all of that hard-won suspicion searching for the flicker, the crack in the story. He didn't find one. What he found instead was something he recognized, because he'd seen it in the mirror once a long time ago. The particular anger of someone who'd been robbed and never made whole. Michael Carter took a breath. And then he did the thing he'd sworn for 12 years that he would never do. He walked through the door. Claire's office was large and quiet glass on two sides, the whole city laid out below. She closed the door behind them. She didn't sit behind her desk. Instead, she took one of the two chairs by the window, and she gestured to the other, and she waited. Michael sat down. He looked at his own hands for a moment. Rough hands. Working hands. 12 years of bleach and hot water and mop handles had turned an engineer's hands into a laborer's, and he looked at them and felt the whole distance of his life in that one glance. "Where do you want me to start?" he said quietly. "At the beginning," Claire said. "Tell me who you were, before." So he did. He told her about being young and hungry and brilliant, about the ideas that used to keep him up at night. The good kind of sleeplessness, the kind that comes from a mind too full to rest. He told her about meeting Vincent. Charming. Vincent connected Vincent, the man who could sell anything to anyone who'd taken one look at Michael's ideas and said, "We're going to change the world together." He told her how they'd built the company from nothing, 2 men and a whiteboard, and a decade of 18-hour days. He told her about the architecture. The one she'd found last night. The thing he'd designed. The thing that still 12 years later formed the bones of her company's flagship system. He told her how proud he'd been of it. How he'd written the documentation himself, every line, including the warnings, including the exact warning about the timing handoff that her team had spent 5 days rediscovering. And then he told her how it fell apart. He told her about the money that started going missing. How he'd noticed and asked Vincent about it, and how Vincent had smiled and said he'd look into it. He told her how the discrepancies got bigger, and how he'd started to worry, and how God, what a fool. What a fool he'd trusted Vincent to handle it, because Vincent handled the business, and Michael handled the work. That was the deal, that was the whole arrangement. He told her about the morning the lawyers came. His voice stayed steady through most of it. He'd had 12 years to build the walls. But when he got to the part about the conference room, about the table full of men in suits, about Vincent sitting 3 feet away, explaining in that soft, sorrowful voice how all of it, every dollar, every falsified record traced back to Michael, his voice caught. "He wouldn't look at me," Michael said. He was staring out the window now, not at Claire. The whole time, he looked at the table, at the window, at his own hands, everywhere but at me. And I kept saying his name. I kept saying, "Vincent, look at me. You know, I didn't do this. Look at me." And he never did. Michael's jaw worked. That's the thing I could never get past. Not the money, not the company, not even my name in the papers. It was that he couldn't look at me while he did it. Because looking at me would have meant admitting I was a person. And it's a lot easier to destroy something when you've decided it isn't a person. Claire didn't say anything. She just listened exactly as she'd promised she would. He'd forged my signature on the documents that gave him control of the patents, Michael went on. Had them notarized somehow, I still don't know how. Set up the financial trail so it all pointed at me. By the time I understood what was happening, it was already done. I'd signed things, real things over the years, trusting him, and he'd built a case out of my own trust. He shook his head slowly. The lawyers wanted $100,000 just to start fighting it. I didn't have it. He'd made sure of that. And every day I spent fighting was a day I wasn't. He stopped. Was a day you weren't what? Claire asked quietly. Michael was silent for a moment. 4 months after they took everything, he said, my wife died. He heard Claire's small intake of breath. Aneurysm. No warning. She lay down with a headache and she didn't get up. His voice had gone very quiet now. And I came home and my daughter was sitting on the floor outside the bedroom door. 6 years old, waiting for her mom to wake up. She looked up at me and she said, "She's sleeping really long, Daddy." The office was completely silent. And that was it, Michael said. That was the whole thing right there. I looked at that little girl and I understood I had a choice. I could spend the next 10 years and every dollar I'd ever make fighting Vincent Ashford in a courtroom, trying to prove I was innocent, trying to get my name back, and probably lose because he had all the money and all the lawyers and all the paperwork. Or I could let it go. Let him win. Let the world think I was a thief. And use whatever I had left to make sure that little girl never spent one single day feeling like she'd been abandoned by the whole world the way I had. He finally turned from the window and looked at Claire. It wasn't a hard choice. It was the easiest choice I ever made. I chose her. I've chosen her every single day for 12 years, and I'd do it again 1,000 times, and I don't regret 1 second of it. He paused. I took the cleaning job because it let me be home in the morning and home at night, that's all. That's the whole mystery, Ms. Anderson. That's why the thief pushes a mop. Because the mop let me raise my daughter, and she was always worth more than my name. For a long moment, Claire Anderson didn't speak. When Michael finally looked at her, he was surprised to see that the sharp-eyed missing-nothing CEO had tears standing in her eyes and was making no particular effort to hide them. "Mr. Carter," she said, and her voice wasn't quite steady, "I have to ask you something. And I need you to think carefully before you answer, because a great deal is going to depend on it." Ask. "The documents Vincent forged, the financial records, the signature." She leaned forward. 12 years ago, you didn't have $100,000 to fight him." She paused. "But you had something else, didn't you? You had proof. Somewhere. A man like you, a man who documents everything, who writes down the why you didn't just walk away empty-handed. You kept something." Michael looked at her, and slowly, for the first time in that entire conversation, something changed in his face. Something that had been buried under 12 years of grief and exhaustion and surrender. Something that looked just a little like the man he used to be. "Ms. Anderson," he said quietly, "why do you think I chose this building to clean?" Claire went very still. "There are 400 office buildings in this city that hire night crews," Michael said. "I could have cleaned any of them. I applied to this one on purpose. 3 years ago, the day I saw the job posting and recognized the company name." He held her gaze. "Because I always knew someday the architecture I built would fail. I knew it because I wrote the warning, and I knew nobody would read it. And I knew that when it failed, it would fail here, in this building, in a room I'd be cleaning." His voice was steady now, steady as it had been at the keyboard. "I've been waiting 3 years, Ms. Anderson, cleaning these floors, waiting for the machine to break. Because I knew that when it did, I'd finally have a reason to walk into a room I wasn't allowed in, and remind the people who buried me that I was still here." Claire stared at him. "You planned this," she whispered. "I waited for it," Michael corrected. "There's a difference. I didn't make the machine break. Your people did that all on their own by scaling it up and skipping the documentation." A grim, tired smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I just made sure I'd be in the building when it happened. And last night, after 3 years of mopping floors and waiting, the machine finally broke." He leaned forward. "And to answer your question, yes, I kept something. I kept everything. 12 years ago, before Vincent finished burying me, I made copies of the original design files. The real ones, with the real timestamps. The ones that prove I built the architecture, and that prove the documents he used against me were forged after the fact." He held her gaze. "I've been carrying that proof for 12 years, Ms. Anderson, waiting for one single person with enough power to actually look at it. And to believe me, the silence in the office was total. Claire Anderson looked at the man in the collared shirt with the working hand sitting in a chair by her window, with the whole city spread out beneath him, and she understood that she was not looking at a janitor, and she was not even only looking at a wronged engineer. She was looking at a man who had spent 12 years playing the longest, quietest, most patient game she had ever heard of, and who had just last night made his first move. "Michael," she said slowly. "That proof. Do you have it? Now, can you get to it?" Michael reached into his jacket, his one good jacket, the one he'd worn for the meeting where they told him he wasn't in trouble. He took out a small worn envelope. It looked like it had been carried a long time. The edges were soft with handling. He set it on the table between them, "I've carried this in my jacket every single day for 12 years, he said. Every job, every building, every night. I told myself it was in case I ever found someone who'd help." He looked at it. "The truth is, I think I carried it because letting it out of my pocket would have meant admitting I'd given up. And I never quite could." He looked back up at her. "The question, Ms. Anderson, is whether you're really who you say you are. Because the man who framed me is on your board. And if I open this, and it turns out you'd rather protect your billion-dollar deal than a janitor, then this is the last mistake I ever make." Claire Anderson looked at the envelope. Then she looked at Michael. And then she reached over to her desk, picked up her phone, and made a call that Michael did not expect. "Marcus," she said. "Cancel my 3 o'clock, the partnership call." A pause. "Yes, I heard you. Cancel it. Push it to next week." Another pause, and her voice went hard as iron. "Because something more important just came up. And Marcus, one more thing. I need you to find out quietly everything you can about a board member named Vincent Ashford, and I mean everything. And I need you to do it without him finding out you're looking." She hung up. She looked at Michael. "There," she said. "I just delayed a billion-dollar deal to hear the rest of your story." She slid the envelope back toward him just an inch, an invitation rather than a demand. "Your move, Mr. Carter, but I think you already know you can trust me. I think that's why you wore the jacket." Michael looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at the worn envelope, the one that had ridden in his pocket through 12 years and 100,000 mopped floors, the one thing he'd never been able to let go of, the last stubborn ember of the man he used to be. And slowly, with hands that had built systems worth billions and now smelled faintly of bleach, Michael Carter reached out and opened it. Inside the envelope were 3 things. The first was a small flash drive, old the kind nobody sold anymore, the plastic scuffed pail from years of writing in a pocket. The second was a single sheet of paper folded into quarters so worn along the creases that it had nearly separated into 4 pieces. The third was a photograph. Michael took out the photograph first. He didn't mean to. His hand just went to it the way a hand goes to the thing it loves. It was a picture of a woman with dark hair and a wide, easy smile holding a little girl of maybe 4 on her hip, both of them squinting into the sun. "That's Rebecca," Michael said quietly. "And Sophie. I keep it in there so that whenever I thought about giving up, whenever I thought about just throwing the drive in a river and being done with it, I'd have to look at them first." He set the photo down gently on the table, face up where Claire could see it. "Kept me honest. You don't quit in front of your wife, even after she's gone, especially after she's gone." Claire looked at the photograph and said nothing because there wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have made it smaller. Michael unfolded the sheet of paper next. He handled it carefully, the way you'd handle something that might crumble. "This is a printout," he said, "of the original design filing. The metadata's on it, the creation date, the author field, the version history. It shows the architecture was authored by me, time-stamped 18 months before Vincent's forged documents claim he commissioned it from an outside firm." He slid it across to her. "The paper doesn't mean much on its own. Paper can be faked. But the drive..." He tapped it. "The drive has the actual files, the originals, with cryptographic timestamps that can't be moved. If you had a forensic team pull those apart, they'd be able to prove to a mathematical certainty that I built the architecture before the date Vincent says he owned it, which means the documents he used to bury me were created after the fact, which means they're forgeries." He looked up. "Which means I didn't steal anything. He did. He stole the whole company, and then he stole my name to cover it." Claire picked up the sheet of paper. She read it slowly, her eyes moving down the columns of dates and hashes, and Michael watched her read it, and he realized his heart was pounding, because in 12 years he had never once let another living soul see this. Not a lawyer, not a friend, not Sophie. Nobody. "You've had this the entire time," Claire said. It wasn't quite a question. "The entire time. And you never took it to anyone." "I took it to 2 lawyers in the first year." Michael's mouth tightened. Both of them told me the same thing, that timestamps can be argued, that Vincent's team would say the files were altered, that it would come down to my word against his, and his came with $100 million company and a floor of attorneys, and mine came with a bankruptcy and a dead wife and a job cleaning toilets. He shook his head. One of them actually said it to my face. He said, "Mr. Carter, you're probably telling the truth. But truth costs money, and you don't have any, and he has all of it. So my professional advice is to move on with your life." Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Move on with my life, like it was a parking ticket. That's—" Claire started. "That's how it works," Michael said, not unkindly. "You know it better than I do. You said it yourself in the hallway. You were a secretary once. You know exactly how it works. The truth isn't free. Somebody has to be able to afford it. And for 12 years I couldn't." He nodded at the drive in her hand. "Until maybe right now. Because you can afford it, Ms. Anderson. You can afford it better than almost anybody in this city." Claire set the paper down. She looked at the flash drive in her palm for a long moment. And Michael watched her, and he understood that this was the real hinge of the whole thing, the moment everything turned on, because she was holding in her hand the power to either finally set right a 12-year-old wrong, or to do exactly what those lawyers had done and tell him it was too expensive and hand it back. He'd bet everything on this woman, on a hunch, on a story about a secretary, on the tears he'd seen in her eyes. If he'd read her wrong, he'd just handed his only proof to a member of Vincent Ashford's own board, and Vincent would know he was alive and awake and dangerous by nightfall, and everything Michael had protected for 12 years would be over. "I need to be honest with you," Claire said finally. Michael's stomach dropped. "When I called Marcus just now and told him to cancel the partnership call," she went on, "I did something I've never done in 25 years of running this company. I put a person ahead of a deal. And I want you to understand that isn't a small thing, and it isn't a free thing. That call I just pushed, that's the biggest contract this company has ever been close to. Thousands of jobs depend on it. Not just mine. Everyone's. And Vincent Ashford's firm is one of the largest investors making that deal possible." She looked at him steadily. "So when I take this drive to a forensic team, and I am going to take it to a forensic team, Michael, I've already decided I am potentially lighting a fuse under my own company. Because if that proof is real, then a member of my board committed fraud, and I'll be legally obligated to act on it, and when I do, his firm will pull out, and the deal could die, and a lot of people could get hurt." She set the drive down on the table gently, right next to the photograph of Rebecca and Sophie. "I want you to know that I know all of that, and I'm going to do it anyway." Michael stared at her. "Why?" he said. The word came out rougher than he meant. "Why would you do that? You just met me last night, on a security camera. You don't owe me anything." "No," Claire agreed. "I don't." "Then why?" And Claire Anderson looked at the photograph of the woman and the little girl, and then she looked at the man across from her, and she said the thing that Michael would remember for the rest of his life. "Because 30 years ago, I needed someone with power to look at what happened to me and say this is wrong and I'm going to fix it. And nobody ever did. Not one person. I had to claw my whole way up alone, and it took me half my life, and there is a version of me that never made it, that's still a secretary somewhere, still furious, still robbed, still invisible." Her voice was very quiet. "I can't go back and be that person for the 23-year-old I was. But I can be that person for you, right now, today. And I think if I hold this drive in my hand and I hand it back to you because it's too expensive, then I'm not who I've spent 25 years telling myself I am." She met his eyes. "So that's why, Michael. It's not for you. Not entirely. It's for the girl I used to be. You just happen to be the one standing in front of me." The office was silent, and Michael Carter, who had not let himself be moved by another human being in 12 years, who had built his whole survival on not needing anyone, felt something crack open in his chest that he'd thought was sealed for good. He looked down at the table, at the drive, at the photograph of his wife. "Okay," he said hoarsely. "Okay. Okay. Take it." He pushed the drive an inch toward her. "Take it to your forensic people, all of it. Do it right." He swallowed. "Just do it fast, please. Because the second Vincent Ashford finds out I'm alive and I've got this, he's going to move. And he moves faster and dirtier than anybody I've ever known. If we're going to do this, we can't give him time to bury it again. Or to bury me. And this time," his voice caught, "this time I've got a daughter." He wouldn't hesitate. If he thought threatening her would stop me, he'd do it in a heartbeat and sleep fine that night. So whatever we do it before he knows we're doing it. Claire nodded slowly. She picked up the drive. She held it a moment, and then she closed her hand around it. "Then we move today," she said. "Right now. I have a forensic firm I trust outside counsel, not connected to the board. They've done sensitive work for me before, and they know how to keep their mouths shut. I'll have them on this drive within the hour." She stood up. "But Michael, I need something from you in return, and you're not going to like it." Michael looked up. "What? I need you to keep coming to work." He blinked. "Tonight," Claire said, "and tomorrow, and every night, exactly like nothing's changed. Same uniform, same cart, same shift. Because if you suddenly stop showing up, or if word gets out that the janitor had a meeting with the CEO, someone's going to ask why, and that question is going to travel, and it's going to reach the one man we cannot afford to alert." She held his gaze. "I know it's a lot to ask. I'm asking a man who just told me the truth for the first time in 12 years to go back downstairs and pretend to be invisible again. But it's the only way to keep you safe while the forensics run. Can you do that? Can you be a janitor for a few more days?" And Michael Carter, despite everything, despite the weight of the moment, felt his mouth twitch towards something almost like a smile. "Ms. Anderson," he said, "I've been pretending to be a janitor for 3 years while I waited for a machine to break. I think I can manage a few more days." Something passed between them then. Not quite warmth. Something more like respect. The recognition of two people who had each in their own way spent a very long time being underestimated, and who had each in their own way decided to do something about it. "Good," Claire said. "Then go home, Michael. Get some sleep. Make your daughter's dinner." She glanced at the clock. "And come to work tonight like nothing happened. I'll get word to you when the forensics come back. We'll use Daniel. Nobody watches the janitor talk to the lead engineer at 3 in the morning. It's the safest channel we've got." Michael stood. He picked up the photograph of Rebecca and Sophie, and after a moment's hesitation, he tucked it back into his jacket where it had lived for 12 years. The drive and the paper stayed with Claire. It felt strange walking away from them, like leaving a limb behind. "Ms. Anderson," he said at the door. "Claire." "Claire." He tried the name out. It felt strange, too. If this goes wrong, it's not going to go wrong. But if it does... He looked at her steadily. "If Vincent gets to it first, or if the timestamps don't hold up, or if it all falls apart, promise me one thing. Promise me you'll keep my daughter out of it. Whatever happens to me. She doesn't even know any of this. She thinks her father's just a man who cleans buildings. If it all comes down, let it come down on me. Not her, never her." Claire Anderson looked at him for a long moment. "I promise," she said. And she meant it, and he could tell she meant it, and that was enough. Michael nodded once, and turned and walked out of the executive office, and back toward the elevator, back toward the life he'd have to keep pretending to live for a few more days. Daniel was waiting by the elevator, still looking like a man who'd seen a ghost. "Well," he said, "is everything what happened in there?" "Nothing happened," Michael said. "I'm the night janitor. I clean floors Tuesday through Saturday, and tonight I'm going to come in and clean them same as always." He pressed the elevator button. "And Daniel, that's exactly what you're going to tell anyone who asks. The CEO had a nice chat with the cleaning staff about the labs. That's all. Can you do that?" Daniel looked at him. And whatever he saw in Michael's face, he understood that this was serious, deadly serious, in a way he didn't fully grasp yet. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, I can do that." He paused. "Michael, whatever this is, whatever's going on, I'm in. Okay. You saved my whole team last night, my whole career. Whatever you need, I'm in." Michael studied the young man's face, and he saw that he meant it, and something eased a little in his chest. Because in 12 years, he'd learned to trust almost no one. And here in the space of a single night, he'd found two people who looked him in the eye. It wasn't nothing. After 12 years of nobody, too, was a crowd. "Thank you, Daniel," he said. And he meant it. The elevator came. Michael rode down alone through the glass, the city rising up around him. And he walked out the front door of the building into the ordinary daylight, an ordinary man in an ordinary jacket. And nobody who passed him on the sidewalk had the faintest idea that he was carrying in his chest a hope he hadn't let himself feel in 12 years. He went home. He slept 3 hours. He woke up and he made Sophie's dinner spaghetti her favorite because something in him wanted to do something good and normal with his hands. And when she got home from her classes, they ate together at the little kitchen table, and she told him about her anatomy exam and a boy in her study group who she insisted she did not like, and Michael listened and laughed in the right places and did not tell her that the whole shape of both their lives might be about to change. "You're happy tonight," Sophie said, watching him over her plate. "Like actually happy. What's going on with you?" "Can't a man be happy to have dinner with his daughter?" "A man can. You specifically are suspicious." But she was smiling. "You sure everything's okay at work? You've been weird since this morning." "Everything's fine at work, sweetheart." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear the way he'd done 10,000 times. "Better than it's been in a long time, actually." And that at least was true. That night, Michael went to work. He clocked in at 11, same as always. He put on the gray uniform. He got his cart, and he oiled the squeaky wheel finally, because he had the time and the heart for it now. And he pushed it out onto the floor and began methodically to clean the building that Vincent Ashford's money helped to run. It was the strangest shift of his life. On the outside, nothing had changed. He wiped the same glass, emptied the same bins, buffed the same floors. But on the inside, everything had changed. Because somewhere in this city, a forensic team was pulling apart a 12-year-old flash drive. And the truth he'd carried in his jacket for a third of his life was finally being looked at by people with the power to act on it. At 3 a.m, Daniel found him on the 41st floor. The young engineer walked up casually, a coffee in each hand, and offered one to Michael, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Two guys on the night shift sharing a cup. But his eyes were bright and urgent. "She called me 20 minutes ago," Daniel said quietly, glancing around the empty floor. "The forensic team. They worked through the night." He handed Michael the coffee. His hand was shaking slightly. "Michael, the drive's real. The timestamps hold. They said it's the word they used was unimpeachable. They can prove you authored the architecture 18 months before Ashford's documents claim he owned it. They can prove the documents used against you were created after the fact." Daniel's voice dropped even lower. "They can prove you were framed." Michael stood very still, holding the coffee, not drinking it. 12 years. 12 years of nobody believing him. 12 years of being a thief in the eyes of the world. A cautionary tale. A name you Googled and shook your head at. 12 years of swallowing it, of choosing Sophie, over the fight of telling himself the truth was a luxury he couldn't afford. And now a stranger was standing on a floor Michael cleaned at 3 a.m, telling him that the proof he'd carried in his pocket for a third of his life was unimpeachable. "Say it again," Michael said. His voice came out strange. "They can prove you were framed," Daniel said gently. "It's real, Michael. It's over. You didn't do it, and now there's proof, and Claire has it, and she's already talking to lawyers about what happens next." Michael turned away. He set the coffee down on the windowsill. He put both hands flat against the cold glass, and he looked out at the sleeping city. And for the first time since the day he came home to find his daughter waiting outside a bedroom door, Michael Carter let himself cry. Not much, not for long. He wasn't the kind of man who fell apart. But the tears came quiet and hot, and he let them, because after 12 years of carrying it alone, someone had finally looked at the truth and said yes. Daniel had the decency to look out the window too, and pretend he didn't notice, and let the man have his moment. "Sorry," Michael said after a while, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "Don't be sorry," Daniel said. "God, don't ever be sorry for that." Michael took a breath. He straightened up. And when he turned back around, the softness was already gone from his face, replaced by something harder and clearer. "What happens now?" he asked. "What did Claire say happens now?" "She wants to meet, tomorrow, you and her and the lawyers." Daniel hesitated. "But Michael, She told me to tell you something and I don't fully understand it, but she said you would. She said tell him Marcus found something on Ashford, something bigger than what he did to Michael, and it changes everything." Michael went still again. "Something bigger," he repeated. "That's what she said. Bigger than what he did to you, and that it changes everything." Daniel spread his hands. "That's all I've got. She said she'd explain tomorrow." Michael stood there in the dark, and he felt a cold current move through him that had nothing to do with vindication. Because he knew Vincent Ashford. He knew him the way you only know a man who has destroyed you. And if there was something bigger than what Vincent had done to Michael, if a security chief digging quietly for one single day had already found something bigger, then Michael understood with a sinking certainty that whatever Vincent was into now was very, very bad. Because the fraud that ruined Michael's life had been in the grand scheme of Vincent's ambitions, a small thing, a tidying up. A man like Vincent didn't stop. He escalated. 12 years was a long time. 12 years was long enough for a man like that to build something monstrous. "Daniel," Michael said slowly, "when I knew Vincent Ashford, he stole a company and framed a man to cover it up. That was 12 years ago, and that was him being careful." He looked at the young engineer. "Whatever Marcus found, whatever's bigger, you need to understand that we're not just talking about clearing my name anymore. If Claire's security chief found something in a single day of quiet looking, then it's something Vincent got sloppy about. And Vincent doesn't get sloppy unless the thing he's doing is so big he thinks he's untouchable." Michael's jaw tightened. "Which means whatever this is, it's not going to end with an apology and my name in the paper. It's going to be a war. And Claire just delayed a billion-dollar deal and pointed her security chief at a man who ruins people for a living." Daniel had gone pale. "You think she's in danger," he said. "I think," Michael said quietly, "that we all just walked into something a lot bigger than a broken machine. And I think Claire Anderson has no idea what she's dealing with." He picked the coffee back up off the windowsill. His hands were steady now. Very steady. "But I do. I know exactly what Vincent Ashford is, and that might be the one advantage we've got." He drank the coffee. "Tell Claire I'll be there tomorrow," he said. "And Daniel, tell her one more thing. Tell her not to let anyone on that board know she's looking. Not one person. Not her lawyers, not her assistant, nobody who doesn't absolutely have to know. Because if Vincent has one friend in that building, one, and word gets to him that Claire Anderson is digging into Vincent Ashford, then it doesn't matter how good our proof is. He'll move first. He always moves first." He set the empty cup down. 12 years ago, I never saw it coming until it was already done. I'm not going to make that mistake twice. And I'm sure as hell not going to let it happen to her." Daniel nodded wide-eyed and disappeared toward the elevators to carry the message. And Michael Carter picked up the handle of his cart, and he went back to cleaning the floor, methodical and calm, an invisible man in a gray uniform, moving through an empty building at 3 in the morning. Except he wasn't invisible anymore. Not really. 2 people saw him now. Soon, maybe the whole world would. He thought about Sophie asleep in her bed, with the star-shaped nightlight 3 miles away, having no idea that her quiet father was standing at the center of something that was about to become very loud. He thought about Rebecca, and the photograph in his jacket, and the promise he'd made to himself over her grave, that their daughter would never feel abandoned by the world. And he thought about Vincent Ashford sitting somewhere in the dark of his own success, not yet knowing that the man he'd buried 12 years ago had just quietly climbed out of the grave. The next morning at 9 o'clock, Michael Carter walked back into the building. Same jacket, same front door. But this time, when he gave his name at the desk, the woman didn't hesitate, didn't flicker. She just nodded and sent him up, because word had quietly gone out that this man was expected. Claire was waiting in a conference room, this time, not her office. A different room, an interior one with no windows, and Michael understood the choice. No windows meant no one could see who was inside. She wasn't alone. There were two lawyers, a man and a woman, both older, both with the careful blank faces of people who were very expensive and very good. And there was one more person standing by the wall, a big, quiet man with watchful eyes that Michael pegged instantly as Marcus, the head of security. But it was Claire's face that stopped him at the door. Because Claire Anderson, who 2 days ago had been the picture of controlled corporate calm, looked shaken. Genuinely shaken. And Claire Anderson did not strike Michael as a woman who shook easily. "Michael," she said. "Sit down, please." She glanced at the door behind him. "Marcus, lock it." The lock clicked. Michael sat. He looked around the table at the lawyers, at the security chief, at the shaken CEO, and he felt the cold current again stronger now. "The forensics came back," Claire said. "You know that. The drive's real. The proof holds you were framed. That part's done. Whenever you're ready, we can start the process of clearing your name publicly completely. You'll have your reputation back. I want you to hear that first, and I want you to know it's not in question anymore. It's a certainty." She paused. "But Michael, that's not why I locked the door." Michael waited. Claire looked at Marcus. Marcus stepped forward and set a thin folder on the table and slid it across to Michael, and Michael looked at it but didn't open it. "When you told me Vincent Ashford framed you," Claire said, "I had Marcus look into him, just background, just to understand who we were dealing with." She swallowed. "Michael, we weren't looking for anything. We were just looking at him. And in one single day of quiet, careful looking, we found something that has nothing to do with you. Something happening right now. Something that's going to hurt a lot of people if it isn't stopped." She met his eyes. "And it's connected to the partnership deal, the government one, the one I delayed." Michael's hand went to the folder. "What is it?" he said. "Open it," Claire said quietly. "But Michael, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you know you're in this, all the way, there's no going back to being invisible after this. Not for you, not for any of us." She held his gaze and her voice was steady, even though her hands weren't. "So I have to ask you the same thing you asked me yesterday. Are you sure? Because you have a daughter. And what's in that folder is the kind of thing men like Vincent Ashford kill to protect." The room was completely silent. Michael Carter looked down at the folder under his hand. He thought about Sophie, about the star-shaped nightlight, about the promise, about 12 years of keeping his head down, staying invisible, staying safe, choosing her over the fight, over and over and over again. And then he thought about the fact that whatever was in this folder was going to hurt people, whether he opened it or not. That was the thing. That was always the thing. The machine was going to break whether or not he was in the building. The only question was whether he'd be standing there when it did. He'd answered that question once already at 2:47 in the morning outside a glass wall. He opened the folder. Inside the folder were pages, financial records mostly. Columns of numbers, transfer logs, corporate names Michael didn't recognize stacked inside other corporate names like a set of nesting dolls. To an ordinary person, it would have looked like noise. But Michael Carter had spent 6 years watching Vincent Ashford move money, and he'd learned too late exactly what it looked like when Vincent was hiding something, and he was looking at it now. "Talk me through it," Michael said quietly. "I can see it's bad. I can't see how bad yet. Tell me what I'm looking at." Claire nodded at the woman lawyer who leaned forward. "Mr. Carter," she said, "what you're looking at is the flow of money behind the Nova partnership, the government deal. Nova isn't just a piece of medical technology. You know that you fixed it. It's the core of a program that's meant to be deployed in federal hospitals, veterans facilities, public health systems. Hundreds of installations, millions of patients. She tapped the page. The government isn't just buying software, they're funding the whole rollout. Billions of dollars released in stages as the system hits certain safety and performance benchmarks, and the money flows through a network of contractors and subcontractors before it reaches the actual work. She looked up. Vincent Ashford's firm structured that network, and these records show that a significant portion of the government's money earmarked for safety testing for redundancy systems, for the things that keep Nova from killing people, is being quietly redirected. Skimmed, routed through shell companies and back into entities Ashford controls. The room was silent. "How much?" Michael said. "We can trace almost 200 million so far," Marcus said, speaking for the first time. His voice was low and flat. "That's just what we found in a day. The real number's higher, has to be." 200 million, Michael repeated. "But Michael," Claire said, and here her voice tightened. "That's not the part that made me lock the door. The money's a crime. It's a big crime. But it's the kind of crime men steal money, they go to prison, the world moves on." She leaned forward. It's what they cut to steal it. To hit the benchmarks and keep the money flowing without spending it on the safety systems. They falsified the testing data. The redundancy fail-safes on Nova. The ones that are supposed to catch a system failure before it reaches a patient. A lot of them were never actually built. Or they were built cheap, and the tests were faked to make it look like they passed. She held his gaze. Nova is about to be deployed into hundreds of hospitals, into machines that keep people alive. And the safety systems that are supposed to stop it from failing on a patient, some of them don't exist. On paper, they exist. In reality, they don't. Michael went cold all the way through. Because he understood now exactly what he was looking at. He understood it better than anyone in that room, better than the lawyers, better than Marcus, maybe better than Claire. Because he had built Nova's ancestor. He knew what those fail-safes were for. He knew what they caught. He knew in precise technical detail what happened to a patient when a system like that failed with no safety net underneath it. "The timing handoff," Michael said slowly. Claire looked at him. "What?" "The bug I fixed. The one your team spent 5 days on. The 71% failure." Michael's voice had gone very quiet and very hard. That failure, the one that looked like a hardware crash in a lab, it just shuts the system down. Annoying, expensive, but safe. Because a lab has a person watching, and when it crashes, the person restarts it. He looked up at her. But in a hospital running on a patient with the safety fail-safes faked instead of built, that same failure doesn't shut down safe. It shuts down wrong. It hands off bad data at the exact moment a machine is making a life-or-death decision about a human being, and with no fail-safe to catch it. He stopped. He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. The lawyers had gone gray. "You're saying," Claire said carefully, "that the bug you fixed the other night is in every unit," Michael said. "It has to be. It's in the core architecture. It's the same handoff. And if they're planning to deploy Nova into hospitals with the fail-safes faked, then every single one of those machines is a 71% failure waiting to happen. Except in a hospital, that failure has a body underneath it." He set the folder down. His hand was perfectly steady, which somehow made it worse. Vincent Ashford stole the safety money. And to cover it, he faked the tests. And the result is that hundreds of machines are about to be put in charge of keeping sick people alive with a fatal flaw in them and no net to catch it. And the only reason I know the flaw is that I built the thing it lives inside. He looked around the table. People are going to die. That's what's in this folder. Not fraud, not embezzlement, a body count. Nobody said anything for a long moment. And then Claire Anderson closed her eyes just for a second. And when she opened them again, something in her had changed. The shaken quality was gone. What replaced it was cold and clear and absolutely resolved. "How long?" she said. "How long until deployment?" "The first wave is scheduled for 6 weeks from now," the woman lawyer said. 40 installations, pending final benchmark sign-off. "Which happens on the partnership call," Claire said slowly. "The one I delayed. The call I pushed to next week." She let out a breath. "I delayed the sign-off. I bought us time and I didn't even know I was doing it." "You bought us a week," Marcus said. "Maybe. Ashford's going to want that call to happen. The longer it's delayed, the more nervous the money gets. He's going to push to reschedule it fast. And the second that call happens and the benchmarks get signed off, the money releases," Claire finished. "And the machines ship, and it becomes almost impossible to stop, because now it's a signed federal contract with 100 moving parts and thousands of jobs attached." She pressed her fingertips to her temples. "He's going to push to move the call up. He's going to want it done before anyone can look too closely. And if I resist, if I keep delaying, he's going to start wondering why." "He's already wondering," Michael said quietly. Everyone looked at him. "You don't know Vincent," Michael said. "I do. A man like that doesn't build a $200 million fraud without watching it every single second. He's got alerts on everything." "The moment you canceled that call yesterday, Claire, he knew. He might not know why. But he knows the CEO of the company delayed the one call that releases his money with no explanation the morning after a system that was supposed to be failing suddenly started working perfectly." Michael leaned forward. "Put yourself in his head. His fraudulent machine mysteriously fixes itself overnight. And the next morning, the CEO cancels the sign-off. If I'm Vincent, I'm not confused. I'm terrified. Because it means somebody found the bug. And if somebody found the bug, somebody might find everything the bug was hiding." He looked around the table. "He's not going to wait for us to come to him. He's already moving. I'd stake my life on it. The only question is what he's moving toward." As if in answer, Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face didn't change, but something in his posture did some subtle tightening, and Michael saw it, and his stomach dropped before Marcus even spoke. "Ms. Anderson," Marcus said. "Ashford's office just sent a company-wide calendar update. He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. He looked up. "The agenda is one item. Review of Nova program leadership and timeline." The room went dead silent. "Leadership," Claire repeated. "He's coming for you," Michael said. It wasn't a guess. "He's figured out that you're the problem. He doesn't know how much you know, but he knows you delayed his money, and he's decided the fastest way to make the problem go away is to make you go away." Michael's voice was grim. "That's his move, Claire. That's exactly his move. It's the same one he made on me 12 years ago. When someone gets too close to what he's hiding, he doesn't fight them. He removes them. He'll walk into that board meeting tomorrow with a story about how you've become erratic, unreliable, how you're jeopardizing the biggest deal in company history for no reason, and he'll have the votes lined up before you even sit down. And then you're out. And the new CEO signs off on the deal, and the machines ship, and it's over." Claire stared at him. "He can't have the votes," she said. "It's my company. I'm the founder. The board—" "How much of your board is connected to his firm?" Michael asked quietly. "How much of your funding? You told me yesterday his firm is one of your largest investors. In a real fight tomorrow morning, are you sure you have the votes? Are you sure?" Claire opened her mouth, and then she closed it. Because she wasn't sure. Michael could see it on her face. She wasn't sure at all. "That's what I thought," Michael said gently. "That's how he does it. He gets his people onto boards, into the money, into the rooms where decisions get made, and then when he needs a vote, it's already his. You've been running this company thinking it was yours. And it is. Mostly. But not tomorrow. Tomorrow in that room with a $200 million secret on the line, I promise you Vincent Ashford has done the math, and he wouldn't have called that meeting unless he already knew he'd win it. The despair in the room was thick enough to touch. One of the lawyers had put his head in his hands. Marcus was staring at the table. Even Claire, formidable Claire, looked for a moment like a woman watching a wave she couldn't outrun. And that was the moment right there, in the lowest, darkest point, with the deck stacked and the clock running, and a man who ruined people for a living about to win again, that Michael Carter did something nobody in that room expected. He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was something older and harder. It was the smile of a man who has been waiting patiently in the dark for 12 years, for exactly this. "Then we don't fight him tomorrow," Michael said. Claire looked up. "What? You can't win a board vote tomorrow. He's right about that. He's got the votes, or he thinks he does, and by the time we could prove otherwise, you'd already be out." Michael leaned forward, and the whole table leaned with him, because something had shifted in the room, some current of authority that had nothing to do with the uniform he wasn't wearing. "So we don't play the game he set up. We change the game. He called a board meeting to remove you quietly internally with his people on his terms. Fine. Let him have his board meeting." Michael's eyes were bright and cold. But a board can't vote away a federal crime. A board can't unfake safety data on machines that are about to kill people. The second this stops being an internal company matter and becomes a criminal one, the board doesn't matter anymore. His votes don't matter anymore. His whole game falls apart, because the game was only ever rigged inside this building. Outside this building, in front of federal investigators, Vincent Ashford is just a man who stole $200 million and faked safety tests on medical equipment. And no board vote in the world can save him from that. The room was very still. "You want to go to the government?" Claire said slowly. "Before the board meeting. I want to go to the government tonight," Michael said. "Not tomorrow, not after he removes you. Tonight while you're still CEO, while you still have the authority to blow this open. Because the second he takes your chair, you lose the standing to do anything. Right now, this hour, you are the founder and CEO of the company, at the center of a federal fraud, and you have forensic proof, and you have a whistleblower." He tapped his own chest, who built the technology and can explain in a courtroom exactly why those faked failsafes are going to kill people. That is the strongest hand anyone has ever held against Vincent Ashford in his life. He looked at her. "But it's only strong tonight. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., it's gone. So we don't have days, Claire. We have hours." Claire Anderson looked at him for a long moment, and then slowly the resolve came back into her face harder than before. "There's a problem," the male lawyer said, speaking up for the first time. He was pale but steady. "Going to the government tonight isn't as simple as making a phone call. To bring a case like this federal fraud, falsified safety data on a government contract, you need it airtight. You need the financial trail documented, verified, and packaged in a way a federal prosecutor can act on immediately. If you go to them with a folder, Marcus assembled in a day, and a flash drive, they'll open an investigation, sure, but investigations take months. And in those months, Ashford removes Ms. Anderson, controls the company, and either buries the evidence or ships the product anyway, while the machines of justice grind slowly along." He spread his hands. "The proof has to be so complete, so undeniable, that they can act immediately. Emergency injunction. Halt the deployment. Freeze the accounts. Tonight. And to do that in the next few hours?" He shook his head. "I don't see how. It would take a forensic accounting team a week to assemble something that strong." Silence. And then Michael said quietly, "It would take a forensic team a week. It would take me one night." Everyone looked at him. "I built the systems this fraud is hiding inside of," Michael said. "The financial architecture, the data architecture. Vincent didn't build any of that himself. He never could. He can't write a line of code. He can barely read a balance sheet. He hired people to build the machine he's hiding in. But the bones of it, the original structure, that's mine. I know how it's built because I built the thing it's built on top of." He tapped the folder. Marcus found the money trail in a day because he's good, but he's looking at it from the outside. I can look at it from the inside. I know where a man like Vincent hides things because I spent 6 years watching him do it, and then 12 years lying awake at night, understanding in perfect detail exactly how he did it to me. His voice was steady and certain. Give me access to the systems tonight. All of it. The financials, the test data, the deployment logs. Give me until morning, and I will hand you a package so complete, so airtight that a federal prosecutor can get an emergency injunction before Vincent Ashford finishes his coffee at that board meeting. Soba. Claire studied him. You'd need admin access to systems a janitor should never touch, she said. If anyone's watching the logs, if Vincent has someone inside watching for exactly this, the moment you log in, he'll know. He'll know someone's inside the fraud, and then he doesn't wait until 9 a.m., he moves tonight. I know, Michael said. He'll know it's coming from inside the company. He might figure out it's coming from you. I know, Michael. Claire's voice softened. You have a daughter. You told me yesterday you made me promise to keep her out of it. If you do this tonight, if you put your hands on that system and he traces it back to you, then you are not invisible anymore. Not to him. And you know better than anyone in this room what Vincent Ashford does to people who become visible to him. She held his gaze. I can't ask you to do this. It's not fair. You already did your part. You fixed the machine, you gave me the proof you cleared your own name. You could walk away right now tonight and let my forensic team take the slow road and keep your daughter safe, and no one in this room would blame you for a second. The room waited. And Michael Carter thought about Sophie. He thought about the star-shaped nightlight and the peanut butter triangles and the promise he'd made over his wife's grave. He thought about 12 years of choosing her safety over everything else, over his name, over justice, over the fight. And then he thought about hundreds of hospital rooms 6 weeks from now. He thought about machines humming beside beds. He thought about the exact technical shape of the failure he'd fixed in a lab in 20 minutes, and what that same failure would do in the middle of the night to someone's mother, someone's son, someone's 6-year-old daughter waiting for a parent to wake up. He thought about a little girl sitting on the floor outside a bedroom door. She's sleeping really long, Daddy. And he understood that there was no version of keeping Sophie safe that involved letting other people's children lose their parents to a machine he could have stopped, because the man who'd let that happen wouldn't be a father worth having. Sophie hadn't been raised by that man, and Michael wasn't about to become him now. 12 years ago, Michael said slowly. I made a choice. Vincent framed me, and I had proof, and I could have fought him. And I chose to walk away instead and protect my daughter and let him win. He looked around the table. I've told myself every day since that it was the right choice, that she was worth more than the fight. And she was. She is. He paused. But I've also known somewhere every single day that when I walked away, Vincent didn't stop. Men like him don't stop. They get bigger. And some part of me has always known that by protecting my own daughter and letting him go free, I might have been signing a check that somebody else's child would have to cash. His voice broke just slightly and then steadied. This is that check, right here, in this folder. This is the thing I let happen when I walked away 12 years ago. And I will not walk away from it a second time. I can't. Not from this. He looked at Claire. Give me the access, he said. I'll have your package by morning. Claire Anderson looked at him for a long, long moment. And then she nodded once and turned to Marcus. Get him everything, she said. Full admin, financials, test, data, deployment logs, all of it. Whatever he asks for, he gets no questions. She turned back to Michael. And Marcus stays with you. All night. If anyone comes, if security shows up, if anyone traces the login and sends someone, Marcus gets you out of the building and you disappear until morning. Understand. You do the work. He keeps you alive to finish it. Understood, Marcus said. And Michael, Claire's voice dropped. Your daughter. Tonight. Where is she? Michael went still. Home. Asleep. Why? Because if Vincent traces this to you tonight, home is the first place he looks. Claire's face was grave. I'm not trying to frighten you, but you know him better than I do, and you just told us what he does. So I'm going to send 2 of my personal security people to sit outside your building tonight, quietly. She'll never know they're there, but they'll be there. She held his gaze. You made me promise to keep her out of it. I'm keeping that promise. Let me. And Michael Carter, who had spent 12 years trusting no one, protecting his daughter alone, carrying every weight by himself because there was no one to share it with, felt his throat close. Okay, he managed. Okay, thank you. Don't thank me, Claire said. Just build the package. And Michael. She stood, and the whole room stood with her, and the meeting was ending, and the war was beginning. When this is over, when Vincent Ashford is in handcuffs, and your name is cleared and those machines are fixed and nobody's child has to die for his greed. She looked at him. Your daughter is going to find out who her father really is. What he really did. Not just the man who made her lunch. The man who took down a monster to save people he never met. Her voice was quiet. You've spent 12 years being invisible so she'd be safe. I think you're about to find out that she'd have been proud of you the whole time. She just never got the chance. Michael couldn't speak. He just nodded. That night at 11 o'clock, Michael Carter clocked in for what everyone believed was an ordinary shift. He put on the gray uniform. He got his cart. And then when the floors were empty and the building was dark, he wheeled that cart into an engineering lab, and he sat down at a terminal, and Marcus stood watch by the door, and Michael Carter went to war with the man who had destroyed his life. He worked through the night. He moved through the company's systems the way he'd moved through Nova that first night, like a man who'd built the bones and knew every joint. And the fraud began to come apart under his hands, because Michael found things Marcus never could have hidden in the architecture buried in the handoffs between systems, exactly where a younger Michael had once watched Vincent learn to hide things. Every shell company, every redirected dollar, every faked test. He pulled it all into the light-documented, time-stamped, undeniable packaged in a way even a first-year prosecutor couldn't miss. By 3 in the morning, he had most of it. By 4, he had all of it. And at 4:17 a.m., just as Michael was assembling the final package, Marcus's phone buzzed at the door. Marcus looked at it. And this time, his face did change. Michael, Marcus said very quietly, the 2 men I have outside your building just checked in. He paused. There's a car, parked across the street from your apartment. Been there 20 minutes. 2 men inside, not moving. He looked up and his eyes were hard. It's not us. Michael's blood turned to ice. He was on his feet before he knew he'd stood. Sophie. She's fine, Marcus said sharply, holding up a hand. She's asleep. My guys have eyes on the building and eyes on the car. Nobody's moved. Nobody's going to get near her, I promise you that. His jaw tightened. But Michael, you need to understand what this means. That car being there right now at 4 in the morning. It means Vincent already knows. He traced the login. He knows someone's inside the fraud tonight, and he's figured out it's you. Marcus met his eyes. He's not waiting for the board meeting anymore. He's moving. Tonight. And he just sent men to your daughter's front door. For 1 full second, Michael Carter could not breathe. Every fear he'd carried for 12 years. Every nightmare he'd swallowed. Every reason he'd stayed invisible. All of it had just parked a car across the street from his daughter's window at 4 in the morning. I have to go, Michael said. He was already moving toward the door. I have to get to her. I have to... Stop. Marcus stepped in front of him, big and immovable. Michael, stop. Think. If you run out of this building right now and drive across town, what happens? You lead them straight to you. You leave this package half finished. And you walk into a situation with 2 professionals when you're a 58-year-old engineer who hasn't thrown a punch in his life. Marcus put a hand flat on Michael's chest. My guys are 20 feet from your daughter's door. 2 of them. Former military. They have eyes on that car and eyes on that window, and if anyone so much as opens a car door, they move. Sophie is safer right now with them than she would be with you. Do you understand me? The best thing you can do for her, the only thing, is finish that package." Michael stood there, chest heaving, every cell in his body screaming to run. "Call them," he said. "Your men. Call them right now. I need to hear it. I need to hear she's okay." Marcus dialed. He put it on speaker. It rang once. "Reyes here." A low voice, calm, professional. "It's Marcus. Status. Building's quiet. Girl's apartment, 3rd floor, lights off, no movement. She's asleep. We watched her come home at 10, and she never left. The car's still across the street. 2 men front seats. They've been on their phones a lot. Making calls, taking calls, waiting for something, or someone." A pause. "They haven't moved on the building. My read, they're not here to go in, not yet. They're here to watch. Somebody told them to sit on the daughter and wait for orders." "Wait for orders to do what?" Michael said, his voice shaking. "Sir, I don't know, but I'll tell you this." Reyes's voice was steady as bedrock. "There are 2 of them, and 2 of us, and they don't know we're here, and we are between them and that girl. Nobody is getting into that building tonight. You have my word." Michael closed his eyes. He gripped the edge of the desk. "Her name is Sophie," he said. "She's 18. She wants to be a nurse. She's got a—" His voice cracked. "She's got a nightlight shaped like a star. It was her mother's idea. Please, please don't let anything—" "Sir." Reyes's voice gentled just slightly. "I have a daughter too. Nothing's getting past me. Go do whatever it is you're doing. We've got Sophie." The line went quiet. Michael stood there a moment longer, and then something happened inside him. Marcus watched it happen. Watched the terror in the man's face harden into something else. Something colder and more dangerous. Because Michael Carter had just understood the situation with perfect clarity. Vincent had sent men to watch his daughter. Not to hurt her, not yet. To hold her. As leverage. As a message. The message was, "I know about her and I can reach her, so stop." 12 years ago, that message would have worked. 12 years ago, Michael had walked away from the fight to keep Sophie safe, and Vincent had counted on exactly that, had built his whole strategy around the certainty that a father would always fold to protect his child. But Vincent had made one mistake. He'd assumed Michael was the same man he'd broken 12 years ago. He wasn't. "He wants me scared," Michael said quietly. "He wants me to run to her. He wants me to stop. That's what the car is. It's not an attack, it's a threat. He's telling me he can reach her, so I'll fold." He opened his eyes, and they were clear and hard. 12 years ago it would have worked. He's betting it'll work now. He sat back down at the terminal. "It's not going to work now." Marcus stared at him. "Michael, you sure? Because if you're wrong—" "I'm not wrong. I know how he thinks." Michael's fingers were already back on the keys. If he actually wanted to hurt her, he wouldn't park a car in plain sight for an hour. He'd have already done it. The car is a warning. It's meant to be seen. He wants me to know he's watching, so I'll stop building this package. Michael typed faster. "So here's what we're going to do. We're going to finish the package. And then we're going to make it so that hurting Sophie doesn't stop anything, because by the time he could hurt her, it'll already be in the hands of the federal government, and hurting her would just add a kidnapping charge to everything else. The only way to protect her is to finish this faster. The package is her shield. Nothing else." And Michael Carter went back to work with a focus Marcus had never seen in another human being. At 4:40, he had it. All of it. The complete financial trail. The faked test data cross-referenced against the real deployment logs. His own expert declaration explaining in language a prosecutor and a judge could both understand exactly why the missing fail-safes would kill patients, and exactly how he knew, because he'd built the architecture they were hiding inside. $231 million in traced fraud. Everything time-stamped. Everything sourced. Everything undeniable. He compiled it into a single encrypted package, and then he looked up at Marcus. "It's done," he said. "Wake up, Claire, And wake up the lawyer. Because in the next 30 minutes we are going to hand this to the one person Vincent Ashford can't buy, can't threaten, and can't outvote." He allowed himself finally a grim breath. The United States Attorney. What happened next happened fast. Claire Anderson, it turned out, had not gone home. She'd spent the whole night in a conference room 3 floors down, awake, waiting the 2 lawyers with her. When Marcus called, she was in the lab within 4 minutes, and she read Michael's package on the terminal over his shoulder, and Michael watched her face as she read it, watched the CEO of a billion-dollar company understand that a night janitor had in a single night assembled the most complete fraud case she'd ever seen. "My God," she said quietly. "Michael, this is..." She shook her head. "There's no hole in this. There's nowhere to hide in this." "That's the idea," Michael said. The male lawyer had already been on the phone. He hung up and turned to them, pale but electric with adrenaline. "I reached the duty AUSA," he said. "Assistant U.S. Attorney. I've worked with her office before. She's coming in early. She'll be at her desk by 6. If we're there at 6 with this package, and if it's as clean as it looks..." He glanced at the screen. "And it looks very clean. She can file for an emergency injunction to halt the Nova deployment this morning, before the market opens, before the board meeting." "Before 9 a.m., Claire said. "Before 9 a.m. For a moment, nobody spoke, because they all understood what that meant. Vincent Ashford had called his board meeting for 9 to remove Claire, to seize control, to sign off the deal, and ship the machines and bury everything. He'd built his whole plan around that meeting, and they were about to make the meeting irrelevant. Because at 9 a.m., when Vincent Ashford walked into that boardroom expecting to win, there would already be a federal injunction freezing the deal, federal agents freezing the accounts, and a federal prosecutor holding a package with his name on every page. "He doesn't know," Michael said softly. "That's the thing. He thinks he's winning. Right now, this second, he's sitting somewhere feeling good about that car outside my daughter's window, thinking he's got me scared, thinking the board meeting is going to go his way." He looked at Claire. "He has no idea the ground already moved. He's about to walk into a room to claim a victory that stopped existing about an hour ago." "Then let's go make it official," Claire said. "Marcus, my car. And triple the detail on Sophie's building. I don't want that car across the street getting a single nervous idea before this is filed." She turned to Michael. "You're coming with me. The AUSA is going to want to hear it from the man who built the architecture. Nobody can explain why those fail-safes matter the way you can." Michael stood up, and then he hesitated. "Claire, Sophie, if I go to the U.S. Attorney's office, if I walk in there, I'm officially the whistleblower. My name's on it. It's real. There's no more invisible after that." He looked at her. "And the men outside her building are still there. They'll be gone within the hour," the male lawyer said. "The moment this is filed, hurting your daughter goes from being leverage to being the stupidest thing Vincent Ashford could possibly do. Every federal eye in the state is about to be on him. Touching her would be signing his own death warrant. He knows that. The second the injunction hits, those men get a call telling them to disappear because their boss just went from powerful to radioactive." He held Michael's gaze. "The fastest way to get that car away from your daughter is to file this. You protect her by finishing it, same as before." Michael nodded slowly. "Then let's finish it," he said. At 6 a.m., a founder and CEO, a night janitor in a gray uniform he hadn't had time to change out of, and 2 lawyers walked into the office of an assistant United States attorney. She was a sharp woman in her 40s, named Diane Okafor, and she'd been a federal prosecutor for 15 years, and she'd seen a great many people walk into her office claiming a great many things. She was, by professional necessity, extremely hard to impress. Michael Carter impressed her. He sat across from her, still in his janitor's uniform, his hands rough from 12 years of bleach and mop handles, and he explained the fraud with a clarity and precision that made her put down her pen and simply listen. He explained the money. He explained the faked tests. And then he explained in quiet, devastating detail exactly what would happen to a patient in a hospital bed when a Nova unit hit its failure point with no failsafe underneath it. And how he knew, because he had built the architecture, that flaw lived inside 18 years ago in a different life. When he finished, Diane Okafor was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I've been doing this a long time, and I want to make sure I understand what you're telling me. You're saying that 12 years ago, the man behind this fraud, Vincent Ashford, stole your company and framed you for a crime you didn't commit. And you have proof of that too." "Yes. And instead of coming to someone like me 12 years ago to clear your name, you walked away and you spent 12 years cleaning office buildings so you could raise your daughter." "Yes. And the reason you're sitting in my office right now finally isn't to clear your name. It's because you found out this same man is about to put faulty medical equipment into hospitals, and people are going to die." Okafor looked at him steadily. "You came in because of the patients, not because of yourself." Michael was quiet for a moment. "The name doesn't matter that much to me anymore, ma'am," he said. "It stopped mattering a long time ago. My daughter loves me, and my wife loved me, and the people who matter always knew who I was." He met her eyes. "But those patients, those are people who are going to trust a machine to keep them alive, and they have families waiting for them. And I know exactly how that machine is going to fail, and I'm the only person in the world who both knows it and is willing to say it out loud." He paused. "So yeah, I came in for them. My name can wait. It's waited 12 years. It can wait a little longer. Those patients can't." Diane Okafor looked at the man in the janitor's uniform for a long moment, and then she picked up her phone. "Get me Judge Harmon's chambers," she said. "Tell them I have an emergency application for a temporary restraining order and injunctive relief in a matter of imminent public safety, and I need to be in front of a judge within the hour." She paused, listening. "Yes, this morning. Yes, I know what time it is. People are going to die if this equipment ships. Get me the judge." She hung up. She looked at Michael and Claire. "You built this case airtight," she said. "In one night. I've had teams of forensic accountants take 3 months to hand me something half this clean." She shook her head slightly. "Mr. Carter, when this is over, I have some questions about how you did that. But right now," she stood gathering the package, "right now I'm going to go get an injunction. Stay reachable. All of you. This is going to move fast." It moved fast. At 8:14 a.m., Judge Eleanor Harmon signed a temporary restraining order halting all deployment of the NOVA system pending federal investigation. At 8:31 a.m., federal agents froze the accounts of 6 shell companies connected to Vincent Ashford's firm. At 8:47 a.m., a team of FBI agents walked into the lobby of the billion-dollar technology company where Michael Carter had until that morning cleaned floors Tuesday through Saturday. And at 9 a.m., Vincent Ashford walked into the boardroom to remove Claire Anderson from the company she'd built to seize control to sign off on the deal that would make him another fortune and ship the machines that would kill people. He was smiling when he walked in. He was still smiling when he saw Claire Anderson sitting at the head of the table, not removed, not shaken, calm as still water with a man beside her. He didn't recognize at first an older man in a wrinkled gray shirt, a man who looked for just a second like nobody, like furniture, like someone your eye would slide right past. And then Vincent Ashford looked again, and the smile died on his face, because Vincent Ashford was looking at the ghost of the man he'd buried 12 years ago. The partner he'd framed, the engineer he'd destroyed, the man he'd been so certain would stay broken, stay quiet, stay gone that he'd stopped thinking about him years ago. Michael Carter looked back at him, and he didn't say anything. He didn't have to. "Michael," Vincent said. His voice had gone strange. What is this? What is he doing here?" He looked around the table at the board members, at Claire. "Claire, what is this?" "Sit down, Vincent," Claire said quietly. "I called this meeting. This is my—" "Sit down." And something in her voice, some absolute finality, made him sit. That was when the door opened, and Diane Okafor walked in, flanked by 2 FBI agents, and Vincent Ashford's face went the color of ash. "Vincent Ashford," Okafor said, "I'm an assistant United States attorney. As of this morning, a federal judge has issued an order halting the NOVA deployment, and federal agents have frozen the accounts associated with your firm's involvement in the program. You're going to want to call your attorney. In fact, you're going to want to call several. For a moment, Vincent Ashford just sat there, and Michael watched the man who had wrecked his life, and he waited to feel the thing he'd imagined feeling for 12 years, the triumph, the vengeance, the hot satisfaction of watching the monster finally fall. But that wasn't what he felt. What he felt looking at Vincent Ashford's ashen face was something much quieter and much stranger. He felt free, not because Vincent was falling, but because Michael suddenly understood with total clarity that he'd stopped needing Vincent to fall a long time ago. He'd built a good life without it. He'd raised a good daughter without it. The vengeance he'd imagined for 12 years turned out to be a much smaller thing than the life he'd actually lived. Vincent wasn't done. Cornered men never are. "You have nothing," Vincent said suddenly, his voice rising, that old charm curdling into desperation. "Whatever he told you, whatever this man told you, he's a convicted fraud. He bankrupted a company. He stole millions. It's on public record. He's a criminal, and you're taking his word over." "He was framed, Vincent," Claire said. "That's a lie. We have the original design files, time-stamped, forensically verified, unimpeachable." Claire's voice was cold and even. "We can prove Michael Carter authored the architecture 18 months before your forged documents claimed you commissioned it. We can prove the evidence you used to destroy him was manufactured after the fact. So no Vincent, not a fraud, a man you framed 12 years ago." She leaned forward. "And then you did it again, bigger, and this time he was in the building." Vincent Ashford looked around the room, at the board members who wouldn't meet his eyes, at the federal agents by the door, at Claire, and finally, at Michael. And here was the thing Michael had waited 12 years for, though he hadn't known it. It wasn't the injunction. It wasn't the frozen accounts. It wasn't even the truth coming out. It was that Vincent Ashford looked him in the eye. 12 years ago, in that conference room full of lawyers, Vincent had destroyed Michael without once looking at him, had stared at the table. The window his own hands anywhere but at the man he was erasing, because looking would have meant admitting Michael was a person. That was the wound that never healed. Not the money. Not the name. The refusal to be seen. And now cornered, finished with nowhere left to look. Vincent Ashford looked Michael Carter dead in the eye. "You should have stayed gone," Vincent said very quietly. "I know," Michael said. "But then I found out what you were about to do to all those people, and I couldn't." He held Vincent's gaze steadily, without hatred, without triumph, just a plain and level truth. "You built your whole life on the bet that people like me would always stay quiet, that we'd take the safe thing over the right thing every time to protect what little we had left." He shook his head slowly. "You were right about me for 12 years, Vincent. I'll give you that. But you were only ever right because nobody I loved was in the room. This time, everybody's daughter was in the room." Vincent opened his mouth, and then he closed it, because there was nothing to say. The FBI agent stepped forward, and Michael Carter watched the man who had taken everything from him be walked out of a boardroom in handcuffs, and he felt his wife's photograph in his jacket pocket right over his heart, and he thought quietly, "We got him, Rebecca. It just took a while." The days after moved like a flood. The story broke, and it broke enormous. A disgraced engineer, framed and forgotten, working as a night janitor for 12 years, single-handedly exposing a $200 million fraud and stopping faulty medical equipment from reaching hundreds of hospitals. It was the kind of story that doesn't come along often, and the whole country stopped to watch it. Michael Carter's name was cleared. Publicly. Completely. The same newspapers that had called him a thief 12 years ago now called him a hero. And Michael found he didn't much care for either label because he'd never been either one. He'd just been a father doing the next right thing one day at a time. The Nova system was rebuilt properly, with real fail-safes this time under Michael's direct supervision, because Claire Anderson hired him on the spot the same morning Vincent was arrested as the company's new chief technology officer. He tried to say no at first. He'd gotten used to the quiet, But Claire looked at him and said, "You've spent 12 years mopping floors while the thing you built made other people rich. You're going to come upstairs now, Michael, and finish what you started, and this time your name is going to be on it." And he couldn't argue with that. The offers came too, from everywhere. Money, fame, a dozen companies wanting the genius janitor who'd taken down an empire. He turned almost all of them down. He'd learned the hard way what mattered and what didn't. But there was one thing he did with the new authority. He'd been given one thing that mattered more to him than any title. He started a program inside the company, a real one, funded and permanent, to find hidden talent among the people nobody looked at. The maintenance staff, the night crews, the security guards, the people your eye slides right past. Because Michael Carter knew better than anyone alive that genius doesn't always wear a suit, and that the person cleaning your conference room might have built the very thing you're sitting in, and that the only reason you don't know it is that you never once bothered to learn their name. He called it the Rebecca Carter Program, after his wife, because it had been her idea in a way. She'd been the one who always said he'd stop to fix a stranger's flat tire in the rain. She'd been the one who taught him that seeing people really seeing them was the whole entire point. And then, on a quiet evening about a month after it all ended, Michael Carter sat across from his daughter at the little kitchen table, where they'd eaten 10,000 meals, and he finally told her everything. She'd read the news, of course. She knew the outline. But she hadn't heard it from him, not the real story, not all of it. So he told her about the man he used to be, about Vincent, about the framing and the choice he'd made and why he'd made it. He told her about the flash drive he'd carried in his jacket for 12 years and the photograph of her and her mother that he'd kept beside it. He told her about the night the machine broke and the choice he'd made at 2:47 in the morning and everything that came after. Sophie listened to all of it in silence, her dinner going cold, her eyes filling and spilling and filling again. And when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. And then she asked him the question she'd apparently been holding her whole life. "Dad," she said, "all those years, you were this brilliant person, you built things worth billions, and you gave all of it up, to pack my lunches, to walk me to the bus, to clean floors." Her voice broke. "Were you really just a cleaner? All that time? Was that really all you were?" And Michael Carter looked at his daughter, this good, kind, strong young woman, who was going to be a nurse, who was going to spend her whole life taking care of people who had turned out so much better than he'd ever dared to hope. And he reached across the table and took her hand. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "I wasn't just a cleaner." He smiled, and there were tears in his eyes, and he didn't bother to hide them anymore. "I was a man who figured out a long time ago that the most important thing he'd ever build wasn't a machine. It was you. Everything else was just a job. You were the work." He squeezed her hand. "I wasn't hiding, Sophie. I want you to understand that. I wasn't a great man in disguise waiting to be discovered. I was exactly who I was supposed to be, doing exactly what mattered most every single day. The rest of the world just took 12 years to catch up to something I already knew." Sophie put her head down on their joined hands and cried, and Michael sat there and let her. And outside the window, the city went about its evening, full of buildings, full of people, every one of them walking past someone whose name they'd never learn. And Michael Carter, engineer, father, widower, hero, janitor, the man they ignored every night, who turned out to be the man who saved them all, held his daughter's hand at a small kitchen table, and understood that he had, against every odd, against every loss, built exactly the life he'd set out to build. He had never once been invisible. He had only ever been waiting for the people who mattered to see what she had always seen, and she had seen him the whole time.